How are you?
Okay, thanks. Morning, Castleback.
Morning.
Productivity. No, I'm sorry.
Good morning, all.
Morning, Megan.
Morning.
Some Morning, all.
Morning.
Morning, Superintendent.
I'm having difficulties here. I have to go on my phone because my computer won't let me in. It's weird. And then when I went on my computer, when I went on my phone, I had to enter in all of the meeting code and the passcode. Wouldn't let me in. It's weird.
Yeah, I'm getting a couple reports of that from our folks. So I don't know if there's some technical issues.
I mean, I don't think, can you just do people have the right link?
It was.
Yeah.
I tried to log on my phone at first and I couldn't get in. So there might be something going on.
Hi, Counselor Sabi George.
Morning, Superintendent. Good morning, everybody.
Okay, it worked fine on my phone. And Superintendent, am I right in remembering that you're only able to be with us at the beginning today?
Right, just for a few minutes. But the team is here.
Yes, no, there's a fulsome team here.
Yes.
All right.
I think we might have everybody, so we can probably get there. Let me just.
That's what I was about to ask. You think you guys have your whole team?
I'm just verifying one more person.
So Megan, is that person here? We all set?
No, they're not. They might be.
And has whatever deck is being presented today, has that come over to us?
Yes, it has. Let me just text my one colleague, but I think we can get started and I'll let you know if they're having any issues if we get to their slide.
Hi, this is Athena. I'm going to be sharing the slides. Could I start sharing my screen? I can't share right now because someone
Yeah,
else.
if you just wait 1 minute, Athena, because what happens is I'll gavel and then I have to read some opening stuff and then we'll have you throw up the slide deck.
Thank you, Councillor Bach. Appreciate it.
No, thank you. All right, Megan, we're good to go? And this person will? Okay, great. Let me just check. Got one person in the... We've just been joined by Monica, if that's who you were waiting for. All right. Let's get going. Calling this hearing of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee to order. I'm Kenzie Bach, the District 8 City Councilor and also the Chair of Ways and Means. This hearing is being recorded. It's being live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and FiOS Channel 964. It's part of the Council's budget review process, which encompasses about 35 working sessions and hearings, where we focus on every aspect of the budget, and about 8 of those have to do with the Boston Public Schools, which comprises about 1/3 of the city's budget. So we're having 2 of those today, one this morning, and we strongly encourage residents to get involved through public testimony. So you can find the full schedule on boston.gov/council-budget. You can find out how to testify at boston.gov/budget-testify. You can also shoot an email to ccc.wm@boston.gov. That's WM as in Ways and Means, so ccc.wm@boston.gov. Or you can tweet at us at the hashtag BOSBudget, BOSBudget. There's an opportunity online to upload videos, which if you get them in 48 hours in advance, will actually append to the end of the hearing recording. Or again, you can join us live in the Zoom room and testify at the end of any of these department hearings. And we'll have 2 dedicated public testimony hearings, one on May 25th at 6 p.m. for folks wanting to testify about the BPS budget, just any aspect. And then one on June 3rd at 6 p.m. about any aspect of the whole budget. So if evenings are more convenient to you, please join us for one of those and we'd be happy to take your testimony. Or you can send written testimony to ccc.wm@boston.gov. So today's hearing is on dockets 0524 to 0526, orders for the FY22 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations for the school department and for other post-employment benefits. Dockets 0527 to 0528, orders for capital fund transfer appropriations, and dockets 0529 to 0531, orders for the capital budget, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. That's a mouthful. It's all the dockets that have to do with the budget, but our focus area today will actually be, as I said, Boston Public Schools, and specifically Commitment 1 of its strategic plan. So we've organized these hearings according to BPS's strategic plan that came out last year. And so both the afternoon and morning hearings today are on Commitment 1, which is eliminate opportunity and achievement gaps. This morning's hearing is on sort of overall alignment with that goal and wraparound supports, including subtopics like workforce diversity, curriculum bias review, code of conduct implementation and disproportionality, social and emotional learning and wellness, family liaisons, social workers, school psychologists and nurses, trauma and crisis response, behavioral and mental health supports, and HERN, which supports our homeless students. And I'll just note that this is a budget that proposes significant investments in a number of these areas around social and emotional learning and mental health supports in light of the pandemic situation we find ourselves in and the sort of perpetual needs that our students have to be well supported in their learning and growing. So that'll be our focus today. I have been joined by my colleagues, Councillor Anissa Sabi-George, who's at-large councillor. She is my vice chair on Ways and Means and also the chair of the Council's Education Committee. Councillor Andrea Campbell of District 4, and Councillor Matt O'Malley of District 6, and also our Council President Pro Tempore. Also just been joined by Councillor Julia Mejia at large. So we're joined here today by Superintendent Dr. Brenda Caselius and her team. I know the superintendent will just be with us at the start of today's hearing, and then we'll have the whole team for the rest. So I want to give her an opportunity to kick us off, and then we'll jump into the presentation, which counselors will find in their inbox from Michelle Goldberg as a reply to the earlier email today. Dr. Caselius.
Madam Chair, members and counselors, thank you so much for all that you do for Boston Public Schools every day. I know many of you are advocating for our students each and every day, and just so grateful and thankful to you, especially during this past year, which has been a really tremendously challenging year for all of us. I am excited about today's presentation. I was excited to learn that we would be talking with you today and focused on opportunity gaps, our opportunity achievement gap policy and the alignment to our strategic plan, and also the work that we are doing for our social emotional well-being of our children. These pieces are a spotlight of our work and core to our pandemic recovery. And we put a huge investment this next year into these resources. So you'll be able to hear from my team today, who have just been tremendously working with our community partners to provide housing supports for mental health, supports for our families to get them connected, and food access, and so many other ways that we have been able to work with the city and across all of Boston to bridge the gaps for our children. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Cooter, who will begin to give an overview again of the budget. Then it will be turned to Dr. Charles Granson, who is our Chief Equity and Strategy Officer, doing a lot of this work and coordination of this work as we, really try to build back the support systems and recover well for our students. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Chief Cooter.
Thank you, Superintendent, and good morning, City Council and members of the Boston community who are at home watching. As our team pulls up their presentation, we have a lot of topics that we're covering today, and I'm reminded that the longest speech in UN history was delivered by Fidel Castro, and he opened it by saying, "I'll be brief." And so with that, I'm going to try and be brief in my comments, but for those of you who are listening to a council hearing for the first time, we wanted to provide some important context about the BPS budget and the fiscal year 22 budget. On the next slide, we often start with the statement from the Opportunity Achievement Gap Office to talk about what it takes for all learners. We are tremendously lucky as a city to have $36 million in new investments coming to us to help us deliver and increase our foundation for quality. And our foundation for quality is our commitment to make sure that every school has resources to serve their students. 100% of the new investments are going towards direct services to schools. This includes 95 new social worker positions and 80.5 positions for family liaisons supporting students in their community. We believe that at a time when other districts are dealing with and trying to backfill the loss of local revenues, this shows a tremendous commitment from the city. We'll go to the next slide. This is, of course, the third year of $100 million, the second year, the superintendent almost tased me, I think. The second year of a 3-year, $100 million commitment from the city to invest in the Boston Public Schools. We are structuring our investments this year around the return, recover, and reimagine. So you're going to hear from different members of our team around this framework, but it's really starting with this commitment from the city. Next slide. This is, of course, one part of an overall investment framework that we're leveraging this year. The first is, of course, the city funding, which represents over 40% of the city's budget. We also have a tremendous amount of federal funding that's coming in, nearly $400 million in relief funds coming in different forms. And then tomorrow night, we're going to be presenting to the school committee on our capital budget. And you've already heard from the city on the overall capital budget, which allows us to make strategic investments and long-term investments in our facilities. Overall federal funding is for the next few fiscal years, about $400 million. We started this year with ESSER Part 1, or what people have referred to as CARES funding, which includes $5 million that we allocated out per the requirements to private and parochial schools. The city also offered us additional funding, $23.2 million, which helped us go one-to-one with Chrome carts. And we have $123 million ESSER Part 2 and $270 million is our estimate for how much we'll be getting in the federal relief package signed by President Biden. Those estimates, we haven't gotten our final allocation yet, but we are beginning the planning process. And on Thursday, we have our first ESSER commission, and Ava Mitchell's here today to talk about that. We've started and talked about the context in which the budget is presented. It includes both the need for us to think about the academic recovery needed for our students, the social emotional recovery from this pandemic, as well as the health outcomes that have affected our students. But as a district, we're also dealing with a number of system-wide issues from the pandemic. Most notably, the district is facing a multi-year challenge in enrollment declines. This is the third year in a row where we've seen significant declines, and the one-year decrease in enrollment is the largest we've seen in 15 years. While this allows us to deal with a smaller district and target more supports to individual students, it is a context that we need to be planning for, is how do we emerge stronger from this pandemic as a district. As I mentioned, what we are looking to do is return well, recover strong, and reimagine what is possible for our students. It's both in recognizing what we need to do now to support our students and open the district strong post-pandemic, but not losing a year. We can't come back as a district we were, because we know that that district failed too many of our students. What we are again challenged to do is both reopen strong and reimagine what's possible, and how do we come back as a district that our students need us to be. A critical part of this, of course, is the ESSER funding that we've received, and we are fortunate to be able to leverage this. Ava Mitchell, our Chief of Accountability, is leading this work and is launching the ESSER Commission to make sure that we are community-driven and community-informed in our recovery efforts. As we start to put together the first application for ESSER Part 2 is due in July, so that is part of the overall process that we're looking to do. And with that, we're gonna start our presentation focused on returning well and the investments that we have to reopen our schools and to prepare. I'm gonna turn the slide deck over, of course, at this point to, as I check my notes, to the Office of Achievement Gap and Dr. Charles Granson.
Thanks so much, Chief Cooter, and good morning, counselors. Great to be here today to be able to share with you in greater detail our work around eliminating opportunity and achievement gaps as outlined in Commitment 1 of our BPS strategic plan. You see here a familiar, I think by this point, quote, Nate referenced it at the beginning of the presentation, which really centers our work. And during the community engagement process that led up to the creation of the strategic plan, a lot of the messages that the superintendent heard from the community and educators was how do we ensure that we remain committed and focused to this mission that was originally laid out in the 2016 preamble of the Opportunity and Achievement Gaps policy. And so our BPS strategic vision, Imagine BPS 2020-2025, really centers this as a part of our mission and is embedded not only in Commitment 1, but throughout the entire strategic plan. But I'll share the Commitment 1.1 states that we will ensure the BPS policies, plans, and budgets advance the Opportunity and Achievement Gaps policy so that our schools are equitably funded and to provide robust academic programming, social emotional supports, giving every child what they need. So this strategic commitment is really the through line and connection point for the work of not only the Opportunity Gaps Office or the Division of Equity Strategy and Opportunity Gaps, but our entire district. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to briefly go over the Opportunity Gaps policy and to give you a sense of sort of how we bucketed the work. And then from there, talk about some of the progress and what this budget allows us to continue. There are 6 main objectives in the Opportunity and Achievement Gaps policy. and they can be categorized into 3 main buckets of work focusing on creating change for our most marginalized populations. They are, 1, a focus on cultural proficiency, both in terms of the practices and approaches to educating our children, but also around the diversity needed across all layers of the system to do that work effectively. And that's objectives 2 through 4 of the policy. The second is examining some of our structures that can be barriers to opportunities for our marginalized populations, including budgets, operations, and larger policies and practices. And that work is outlined in Objective 5 of the policy. And then the ecological supports from students and families and communities as partners for creating the opportunities needed for success of our most marginalized students and populations. And that's in Objective 6 of the policy, and also strongly reinforcing Commitment 6 of our strategic plan. Next slide, please. As the OAG policy states, the implementation of the plan was not just to be about a single division or office or individual, and that no individual can do it alone, but the work of many offices all together. And it's important, it's an opportunity to push the ideology that everyone's work in the district was centered around equity and this idea of targeted universalism, which is really the sort of research base and foundation of the orientation of much of the work. And this idea that our collective efforts will go much further and deeper than what any person could do. And so as a part of that process, and from 2017 to 2020, to give a little context, there has been work to create goals, or there was work to create goals. And although there were a lot of them, over 100, this was across 30 distinct departments and units. This past year, we actually are in the process, along with our strategic plan, of coming up with new goals that are aligned to our work in our strategic plan. And that's work that departments have undergone along with their work in creating work plans that align to our strategic plan. This is really key because it's a process that allows leaders to really engage in reflective practice, and there's not often time to stop and pause and think. But developing these implementation goals aligned to the OAG policy and the strategic plan, and having that opportunity to think about how we get to more equitable outcomes and how our efforts and our practice as leaders are going to lead to equitable outcomes is what this process allows us to really think deeply on. The work of our Opportunity Gaps office and our entire division, and many of the leaders also involved with our Excellence for All program, has been to really push the thinking of district leaders and push the thinking also in working with school leaders to be able to start to develop their own critical lens toward this work so that we can figure out how to dismantle the barriers that have impacted students historically. Next slide. So we like to share several accomplishments around cultural proficiency. Some of our most recent work is focused on the implementation of the culturally responsive instructional observation protocol, known as CRIOP. This is the protocol that we use to operationalize our work around culturally and linguistically sustaining practices, specifically around the second and third competency. Also, our work around school diversity hiring targets, our delivery of CLSP and CRI professional development to thousands of BPS employees and partners. And then we've even done work with our BSAC students around the CLSP pilot. And so I'll give a little bit more detail about that work. Next slide. So I won't read the words to you, but I do want folks to take an opportunity to just to take in sort of the explanation and definition we use for our work around culturally and linguistically sustaining practices that you hear me refer to as CLSP. It is about providing a clear definition for cultural proficiency across the district. And that was one of the first tasks of the Opportunity and Achievement Gaps Task Force and our work to ensure that throughout the division and throughout the entire district, and as clearly outlined in our strategic plan, that we are really grappling with this question of a part of getting to equitable outcomes is ensuring we have culturally proficient leadership that is reflective of the students and families we serve and that is able to meet their need. And I want to be remiss if I didn't just acknowledge the past leaders who've helped build this foundation in the office, Dr. Rose, Dr. Frederick Clark, and our current leaders. They're folks doing this work and supporting not only in the central office, but in schools. My new deputy, Dr. Regine Filippo, Harold Miller, who's our assistant superintendent of opportunity gaps. I'd also like to mention that notable thought leaders and researchers whose work have paved the way, Geneva Gay, Gloria Lasson-Billings, and Django Paris, is the research basis for the definition. Next slide, please. And so as I mentioned briefly, it's not enough just to define CLSP, but it must be operationalized. And so we've done this in several ways. But here, specifically, like to go a little deeper on the CRIOP. This is work that operationalizes CLSP, specifically the second and third competencies. And it looks at instructional practices, discourse, classroom relationships, family collaboration, assessment practices, critical consciousness. And what's very significant in terms of this year and our work, Chief Cooter referenced the investments that we receive that we're in year 2 of. All BPS transformation schools have a CLSP goal, and they utilize the CRIOP for their walkthrough observations that they do with district leaders and also internally in their schools. This is significant, and this continues to be the kind of work and the practices that we've implemented in the Boston Public Schools that really sets us apart across the nation. Next slide. As a part of our work for culture and proficiency, the OIG policy and objectives 3 and 4 also articulates the goals of diversifying our staff in schools and centrally, as well as ensuring that there are highly effective teachers in every classroom. And most also, I want to acknowledge that our strategic plan in 2 commitments identifies our need to hire faculty, staff, educators, leaders that reflect the students and families we serve. And so this is a work that is critical. And as a district, we hold ourselves accountable for hiring culturally and linguistically diverse staff so the students experience high quality instruction. We hold the view that high quality instruction can only be achieved when experience for students includes cultural and linguistic affirmations and responsive practices. And that includes who they see in front of them in the classroom. And so for this work, to reduce the racial and cultural linguistic gap between students and staff, again, BPS believes the strategic change is needed both in the central office and in individual schools. And if you look at the data that we give to schools, which is what you see here, you'll notice that there's a parity index, which tells schools how many teachers of which subgroup it would take to get to 3/5 or 2/3 or ultimately 3/4 of their student population. You also see the average amount of vacancies that a school has had in the last several years and the amount of years it would take to get to those parity goals in order to obtain a certain percentage of diverse hires. It's not enough for us to only get to the Garrity order, which we honor, but which was called for 25% Black teachers and counselors and 10% other minority. We must also get to parity, which is a staff reflective of the student populations, the student groups that we serve. Next slide, please. Another key accomplishment has to do with removing structural barriers. And this is work that is centered in our strategic plan in Commitment 1 and identified in Objective 5 of our OIG policy. Much work remains, but some notable efforts. I want to recognize significant work, especially under the superintendent's leadership, Right before we experienced the pandemic, of doing training with all district leaders around our racial equity planning tool, which really sets the stage for how we do our work to get to equitable outcomes, and that being required for all the work that we do. And that work becomes ongoing as we build that muscle. Racial equity impact statements have been a part of school committee meetings, but we've also strengthened our work on that internally. We've also pushed for new ethnicity and nationality codes to better understand the nuanced characteristics and needs of our families. And so that data has begun to be collected over the last few years. And through the leadership of our EFA team, we incubated the Excellence for All initiative. The demographics of students who experience EFA mirror our BPS student population. And we expanded UPK through the work of our early childhood team, our work Office of Instructional Information Technology did an amazing job in the middle of the pandemic in lowering the student technology device gap. And so we are a one-to-one district, and that was an amazing effort during that time. We were already planning to go there, and the pandemic definitely sped it up for us. Our exam schools policy for admissions policy for 2020, and that work is still undergoing in progress by the task force, but a really important shift there to get to more equitable access to exam schools. The exam school initiative has increased the number of students of color who are served to have access to admission schools. And then we're launching a strategy for success to support incoming students to the 3 exam schools this year. And there are additional racial equity embedded practice initiatives that include, but are not limited to, our continued work around 10 Boys, 10 Girls, peer group connection, early warning indicators, building assets and reducing risk, and success mentors, My Brother's Keeper, and many more. Next slide, please. So I won't go too much in detail here, but I think the 2020 exam schools mission policy was really a good example of when the district has been able to use the racial equity planning tool. We've had many policies, for example, our student privacy policy, as well, our attendance policy. These were examples of when we've used this tool, which really moves us to be clear about what our desired outcomes and results are, to make sure that we're focusing our work on and grounding it in data, both quantitative and qualitative. And then that we are engaging stakeholders and the people most impacted by the work, and ensuring that the people who are at the table to make the decision actually reflect the students and families we serve. And so this has been a key highlight. Next slide. There's a lot of work underway. We have an advanced work class working group that is also looking at that model and looking at how we get more equitable access, as well as learning from other programs like our Excellence for All programs, which has started in 2016. It expanded Black and Brown students' access to quality instruction and enrichments. Students take STEM, world language, are given explicit high quality writing instruction. In 2019, for example, EFA students at the Harvard-Kent worked on a robotics project for the construction field and presented at the Suffolk Construction and Top Construction Engineering Company, which is a top construction engineering company in Boston. And so they are doing amazing work with students, educators in schools, and it's about providing the training and support and the frameworks. We know that when we provide students with opportunity to do high quality work, they rise to the occasion, and that's what we've learned from that work in the Excellence for All program. Next slide. The Opportunity Index is something that many of you may be familiar with, was an important innovation and part of the 3rd set of key accomplishments. And so the OI is a tool that serves to more equitably distribute funds and resources to schools. And it is the OI scores are school level scores based on neighborhood, family, individual characteristics of the school students. The score intends to measure variables outside of schools' control to account for the needs and challenges of their student groups. We use this index to more equitably distribute partnerships, dollars, and other discretionary funds. Next slide. So the other key accomplishments in the third area, bucket of work I mentioned at the beginning, are the ecological supports and how we authentically engage students, families, and communities. And that is a part of our strategic plan around amplifying voice, as well as our OAG policy objective 6. The opportunity portfolio is vetting an analysis process of current BPS partners and partner BPS profiles. It's aligned with the Opportunity Index and also includes elements of CLSP. There's been foundational CLSP and anti-racism trainings with partners, and intentional and authentic engagement with various stakeholders in the racial equity planning process, and working with partners, especially in this past year, given the COVID and pandemic context, and their work to support our students and our schools, making sure that they're well-versed in our racial equity planning tool and our commitment to doing racial equity analysis before we implement any major initiatives or support systems for schools and students and their families. Next slide. And so some of our work and future-facing work, next steps, is will be around continued alignment of this work with our strategic plan. It is very much aligned, but obviously you can have separate and historical processes, and we're trying to get folks to, for example, an example of this, we did meetings with our across 50 central office departments. And instead of doing separate meetings with them around the OAG policy implementation plan and separate meetings around their strategic plan, work plans, that was an aligned process, and that information is in one place right in front of them. We will begin measuring the impact of the new structures and initiatives where possible, and further flesh out the sort of through line from schools to from central office to schools. And so when we look at a district-wide strategic plan, central office work plans, schools have had historically quality school improvement plans. Just last year, one of the things that was a new feature is that every school has an OAG policy aligned goal as a part of their school level plans. And we look forward to doing more work in this upcoming year to refine that process so that we can see that through line and connection between our large scale district vision outlined in a strategic plan, and to be able to see how that shows up in schools and ultimately impacts classrooms and students. And so next slide, please. And as I wrap up, the last sort of important bucket of work and major accomplishment that I want to share here is our work around increasing our workforce diversity. And here you see on the slide, directly pulled from our strategic plan, and eliminate opportunity and achievement gaps, and commitment 5, cultivating trust, our work in this area. This year saw the second largest single year increase in the percentage of Black teachers and guidance counselors in the last 7 years. This was an increase of 0.65%. While sounding modest, this puts us over the 22% for the first time in 7 years. And we are also at the highest total percentage of teachers of color, 39.45%. This is unprecedented to have growth during a pandemic when urban districts nationally have experienced dramatic reductions in workforce diversity. And so we really appreciate the team. Sarah and Daly leads our recruitment, cultivation, and diversity team with the work that they continue to do, and also our commitment from school leaders as they continue to hire in this direction. We are optimistic that this will be a continuing trend, and have both expanded and created intentional interventions. And we've fully launched 4 BPS affinity recruitment advisory councils to invite the community and BPS staff to advise in recruiting Latinx, Asian, deaf and hard of hearing, and also those from historically Black colleges and universities. All BPS schools set school-based diversity hiring goals, signifying the district-wide commitment and coherence around this work. And then to expand the, we've also expanded, and this was one of the things that the superintendent came in and charged us with right away, our BPS teacher cadet program. And so it's now expanded to students in grades 7 to 12. And then lastly, I'll acknowledge that we launched the George B. Cox Equity in Urban Education Fellowship to cultivate both undergraduate and early career BPS alums. Next slide. Retention is as important as recruitment. I'm happy to confirm that in the school year 1920, BPS piloted a comprehensive exit interview process for all educators of color that includes school leaders of color, a central office, and school-based staff. Comprehensive exit interviews are being performed again and for this school year. Affinity groups in the wake of the death of George Floyd in response to the dialogue on race and race relations in our community beginning last summer, we expanded the presence of race-specific affinity groups, both school-based and central office level. In addition, since August 2020, the superintendent has hosted 18 meetings with various affinity groups, giving her an opportunity to listen to their concerns directly. The other exciting news as it pertains to retention is also great news for our pipeline work. BPS MTEL Prep support program is an exemplar in the state, achieving passing rates that outperform the state on all MTEL tests. This past year, we experienced a surge in requests for MTEL prep supports and have continued to offer programming remotely. Noteworthy, the BPS MTEL prep program was able to support 38 educators of color to achieve their license in a 7-month period. Next slide.
That's me.
I think we can go back one. Okay. And so really quickly, I'll just say, you can see from the right side of the slide, note that we've been able to hire 36 educators of color from our 3 teacher prep partner programs, Teach Next Year, BTR, Boston College Donovan Scholars Program. On the left side of the slide, you can see we list our 6 university partners. We utilize our university partners to support the professional growth and development of our educators of color. A total of 56 educators of color are currently enrolled in a degree program at Regis College, BU, Wheelock, or Southern New Hampshire University. BPS Northeastern launches the McFarland Fellowship, granting up to $15,000, $20,000 scholarships to earn a Master's of Arts in Teaching. And this is a $300,000 commitment for the educators who participate in our BPS diversity programming. And so just a touch of some of the ways we're partnering and continuing to, consistent with Commitment 6 in our strategic plan, activate the partnerships to assist us with this work. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Renee Omalade, presenting on behalf of Elich Tabor.
Thank you, Charles. Good morning, everyone. My name is Renee Omalade. I'm the district's hub school coordinator in our Department of Student and Community Impact under, as Charles mentioned, Assistant Superintendent Elich Tabor, who I'm presenting on behalf of. So in addition to the important work we are doing around our OAG policy and ensuring that there are diverse educators of color, we are also ensuring that our students are returning to an environment that is healthy, safe, and supportive. Our continued investments in nursing services support these efforts. The FY22 proposed investments build off past investments in school nurses that have led us to our current team of 159 wonderful nurses and 6 health paras, all of whom continue to play a critical role in ensuring students and staff a safe return to school. In order to support our school nurses and continue the ongoing work of ensuring evidence-based health safety protocols, and that they're up to date during this pandemic. We've invested in a strong administrative team, aligned with our commitment to increase representation across leadership. Health Services now has a new trilingual project manager, an assistant director, Dr. Arlene Swan Mahoney, and a multilingual senior director, Dr. Jenny Lopez Lopes, who is also a Madison Park alumna. Health Services has been instrumental in the planning and implementation of school-based testing for students and staff. Student pooled testing began March 8th for students with consents, and they're tested weekly for ongoing surveillance through this state-funded program. Additionally, the district has committed over $2 million to support staff testing and the vaccine rollout for staff. And with that, I will be transitioning us to our Recover section. And so this kind of brings us back to our focus for this year's budget on return, recover, and reimagine. Our focus for Recover is to ensure that school communities have what they need, not only to repair the damage done by COVID-19, but also to create the conditions in which students and families can thrive. In order to do this, we see it as essential to both provide stability to school communities despite declining enrollment and to invest in social and emotional family supports. COVID-19 has highlighted the importance of providing additional social, emotional, and family supports to our schools. And so kind of what you see here is the prioritization of strategies with demonstrated ability to improve outcomes for our neediest students. So for that reason, as a part of Recover, we have proposed an acceleration of our rollout of these supports by investing in 81 new family liaisons and 95 new social worker positions for next year. These investments, combined with our nursing investment from 2 years ago, will be critical components to a broader hub schools model that supports school communities in responding rapidly to student and family needs and coordinating supports across schools. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so the investment in the Boston Community Hub School strategy bridges our recovery efforts with our commitment to reimagining schools in Boston. These dual pandemics forced us to confront the fact that how we function thus far has worked to sustain a status quo that is fraught with inequities and injustice. And we are reminded that in order to move towards an equitable recovery, we must listen to those closest to the pain and injustice. So as a BPS alumna, parent, and employee, it's my honor to be a part of the Hub Schools District team made up of 2 additional women of color, including Elite, who was mentioned before, as well as Joanne Etienne, who are also BPS alumni and parents. And we work alongside our school communities and partners like the YMCA to launch this Boston Community Hub Schools strategy. Building off of years of community school research and integrating our commitment to racial equity, Boston Community Hub Schools moves us away from deficit and paternalistic approaches towards asset-based strategies to partnering with families, students, and community to advance recovery in a way that honors their assets, needs, and aspirations and enables them to shape their healing. As Charles mentioned, this work is grounded firmly in culturally and linguistically sustaining practices. This investment enables us to engage deeply with 2 cohorts of schools that you'll see here to reimagine our schools as spaces for healing, innovation, and liberation, where students and adults are learning from and with each other and activating agency such that students are equipped to critically engage with their world and transform it. So while this investment focuses on these 2 specific regions, our broader vision is that every BPS school will become a Boston Community Hub School. In specific, 13 new school-based hub school managers will be working in these 2 cohorts, focused on some of the student communities hardest hit by the pandemic. The managers that'll be placed at these schools will work very closely with students, families, school leaders, partners to leverage lessons learned from the longstanding hub schools works by some of the schools. The investments in our family liaisons and social workers that will help facilitate opportunities for our scholars. The work of these these managers is really grounded in driving action and building up systems and opportunities that connect students, families, and community, and to just promote the fact that our schools are filled with joy, love, and community. So with that, I will pass that on to Carmen.
Thank you, Renee. Good morning, counselors and members of the Boston community. My name is Carmen Calderon O'Hara. I am the Director of Social Work for the Boston Public Schools. I'm also a parent of the Boston Public Schools. And so I'm here to talk about the mental health supports that we are providing students this year and in the coming year. Our FY22 investment builds on the FY21 investment by moving beyond the initial transformation schools and bringing a commitment to bring at least a half-time social worker to every Boston Public School. We have worked very hard to make sure that our social workers represent the students and families that we serve. And as you can see, 78% of our social workers in the hiring process last year identified as persons of color. We are currently deep in the hiring process. We have over 300 applicants at this point and have conducted over 91 interviews. And we are just as committed to make sure that if we don't match that number, that we improve it. And that's our hope. Our social workers provide support to schools in a tiered approach. I'll start in the bottom with the whole school, or what we like to call tier one, really focusing on strengthening our practices to make sure that they're anti-racist, that we're looking at our policies or practices, that we're looking at data, and that we're mitigating conditions that are either creating trauma or exacerbating trauma. And from there, we really look at our students and their needs and making sure that we provide tier two supports in small groups and tier one to our students with the highest needs in individual counseling. And this is something that's also provided by our partners, the school psychologists. Next slide, please. So the investment of the social workers is a unique one because traditional social workers have been direct service providers, but we have created a role that is 50% direct work, as I mentioned in the previous slide, and then 50% really macro and systems work that's focusing on the anti-racist work. And we did this because we recognize the complexity of trauma and that there are various ways of healing that integrate different cultures and collective Indigenous, African, and Eastern cultures of our students. So we created a very robust recruitment and hiring process. As I talked about, our central vetting process that's ongoing right now is really focusing, making sure that our social workers are bringing an equity lens to this work. That's something that we can't teach people. We can teach other more specialty skills, but that lens really either you bring it or you don't. So we need to make sure that the people that we're bringing in have that capacity with them. We are building a professional arc of learning. This year we provided a pretty robust monthly professional development calendar, and we will continue to build on that with a focus on capacity for that anti-racist work. And also we're committed to making sure that all of our social workers are trained in restorative justice practices. We are working on building a peer coaching model so that as we bring this large number of social workers, they have someone who can provide them with some guidance and some coaching around the day-to-day activities at the school level. And also to provide some case consultation, because as you can imagine, they're dealing with some pretty complex situations on a daily basis. We also are working on creating pipeline programs with our local schools of social work. And we hope to be added to the list that Dr. Granson showed earlier so that we can build our social workforce as well. And this year we strengthened our internship program. We actually created a database of all the interns that are in the district right now and who are the supervisors who are willing and able to host interns. Interns provide quite a wide range of services to our students and families. So that's an important workforce development strategy as well. And finally, as part of the process, I want to talk about as part of the investment, a waiver process was created to ensure that the investment was responsive to each school community needs. Through this process, 15 schools were approved a waiver that allowed them to reinvest part or all of their allocation by making sure that they demonstrated capacity to provide clinical mental health supports and used the racial equity planning tool at their school level through their equity roundtables or the school site council. And some of the schools receive waivers for either to increase their school psychologist allocations or to hire a CLSP practitioner or restorative justice practitioner or a hub school coordinator. Next slide, please. So this slide just kind of highlights the staffing, and we've come a long way from spring of 22 when I was brought in to direct the social work department. And this year we had 25 schools that had one full-time school psychologist, with 30 schools that had at least one full-time transformation social worker, and an additional 10 schools that had half-time transformation social workers. For our upcoming year, we are anticipating that 31 schools will have a full-time school psychologist, and 89 schools will have at least one full-time social worker, with multiple schools having more than one. Next slide, please. Finally, just briefly, just wanted to highlight some of the remote supports that we provided while we were in remote learning. We obviously had to pivot very quickly in providing these supports to our students and families, and we'll continue to do this as we continue to return all of our students. So this is a pretty exhaustive list of the supports that we have provided. I'm sure there's some things that are missing here, but as you can see, we work very closely with our students, our families, and to do this, we really had to work with partners in pretty much all of the departments in central office that you can think of. So, and with that, I will pass it on to my colleague, Monica Roberts, Chief of Student, Family, and Community Advancement.
Good morning, council members and to the Boston community, and thank you, Carmen. As I dive into family liaisons, I want to share that the value of this investment, of the investments that you've heard about, are in the work that they collectively do to support families. Our family liaisons serve as part of school-based teams alongside the social workers and the nurses and other staff who are coordinating efforts and supports on behalf of our families. So our new investment of family liaisons builds upon investments we made last year in all of our transformation schools and any school whose student body was 50% or greater English learners. This investment will ensure that all schools will have a full-time family liaison in their building for next school year. The liaisons that were hired the past school year are truly reflective of the racial, cultural, and linguistic diversity of the BPS community. In fact, 98% were people of color. They have been able to build deep and authentic relationships with our families throughout the difficult year and served as a source of support and really a connector for our families to the resources that they need, as well as our students. Our school leaders have described them as critical assets, particularly because they bring language capacity to the table, which has been really important. They've helped families navigate challenges. We'll talk a little bit about the work we do centrally to support them. Everything from housing to food access to counseling, they've really been able to help our families navigate. And so we believe it's important that every school has this position to help support our families and to participate as a broader team of support for our communities. Next slide, please. So as we think about expanding this particular investment, we did a lot of work last year focusing on the hiring process. Our office did a lot of recruitment through our extensive networks, and our Office of Human Capital really did a lot of support in terms of making sure we could reach a diverse set of folks who had access and family engagement. Experience in family engagement. One of the things that I like to say, everyone thinks that everyone can do an engagement, but it is a skill that folks are building. So it's something that we pay attention to in our hiring process. We do a lot of vetting around that. And then also we vet for linguistic capacity to make sure people are proficient in the language that they say they speak, so that we ensure that our families are having language access on the ground. In addition, we put a lot of time into professional development support as part of the district team, but also specific to this position. They get professional development twice a month, almost all day, supporting them from everything from strategic planning, working as part of a school team, developing and implementing effective engagement strategies, meeting facilitation, Also coaching educators in their building, because the role of the family liaison is not to be the it person in the school. While they may be the first person that families connect with, that part of their role is to make sure that the entire school community feels some level of ownership for the work of engaging our families, and they do that alongside the school leader. So that is some of the work that we're doing, and we're looking forward to expanding that particular resource to our families. With that, I'm going to turn it to my colleague, Brian Marks, who will also talk about some of the work we do to support our families who are experiencing housing transition.
Thank you so much, Monica. Again, my name is Brian Marks. I serve as the Senior Director of Opportunity Youth. I'd like to thank the City Council members and the community as a whole for the opportunity to share some of the highlights around our COVID response to better support students and families experiencing homelessness. We have a $1.9 million funding allocation that's distributed directly to school budgets to better support precariously housed students and families. Year to date, 93% of these funds have been expended. So each year, the percentage of funds expended has increased since this was launched in school year 2017-18, and as well as the quality of projects has improved each year. As part of a direct partnership with Boston Housing Authority, we've issued 578 housing vouchers to Boston Public Schools families over the past 13 months. Year to date, 509 of these families have been housed. This includes over 1,000 school-age children. And the plan right now is to focus on ensuring that every single one of those families is housed and leased up with their housing voucher. We're continuing the partnership to look at emergency vouchers as well as city vouchers. And this will focus in the near term on ensuring that families that were unable to get a voucher, whether it was related to their citizenship status or where they were in the queue when the funds sunset at the end of December, ensuring that those families also have the opportunity to be stably housed through this initiative. Another encouraging note is that 80% of the families that received a voucher have been able to remain in Boston. We've also done a lot of work to ensure that all of our students have access to critical technologies throughout the pandemic. 85% of the students experiencing homelessness opted in to receive a Chromebook. We also partnered with our Office of Instructional and Information Technology to ensure that families that were unable to access broadband internet through Comcast were able to get a hotspot. We also invested an additional $250,000 in case management to ensure adequate wraparound supports to better support families that had been displaced outside of Boston and may have had limited access to the food pickup super sites. We've delivered over 21,000 meals to families displaced outside of Boston due to homelessness. Some other areas of note, we also coordinated a workaround to ensure that families who had been recently displaced due to homelessness, who did not have an updated address in our student information system, were still able to receive their pandemic EBT card to ensure critical food assistance throughout the pandemic. We are prioritizing access across virtually all BPS programs for students experiencing homelessness. This included priority return to in-person instruction, our ongoing partnership with extended learning opportunities to ensure priority access to summer learning program, as well as priority entrance to exam schools. We continue to coordinate outreach to a variety of housing stabilization programs among various partners. We also distributed over 2,300 winter coats, over 3,500 backpacks, and we've had dedicated partnerships to ensure academic support throughout the pandemic. In particular, this includes a partnership with Boston Partners in Education to provide virtual academic mentoring and tutoring services. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Sylvia Romero Johnson.
Good morning, council members. Thank you for having us today. My name is Dr. Sylvia Romero Johnson. I'm currently the interim chief academic officer in the academics division. we have a unique opportunity to reimagine what's possible for our students, and we have been working on that across our departments. Let's transition to the next slide. I will start with curriculum bias review. Bias review starts with adopting instructional materials, but it doesn't end there. Central office, school leaders, and teachers have received training on how to implement the 7 forms of bias review as an ongoing process and reflection. New materials are reviewed for bias and standards alignment. Most recently, we adopted a series for our ELA adoption and for our Spanish language arts curriculum adoption after careful bias review. We have conducted review of curriculum that resulted in materials not being adopted due to concerns. We do have to maintain a sharp focus on adopting quality materials that truly reflect our students' experiences. We are continuing to use expeditionary learning in grade level bands until national materials have been updated and meet our needs as a district as a foundational curriculum. Next slide. In addition to curriculum reviews, we are aware that our assessments also need to go through continual bias reviews. We have adopted the DESI assessment framework, which consists or is built on 4 pillars of meaningful inputs and outputs for assessments. While no tool is perfect, these tools are intended to be used to ensure that items are not disadvantaging or advantaging certain student groups. And this is definitely a multi-departmental effort across data and accountability, opportunity gaps, and academics. I will now introduce my colleague, Jill Carter, who's the Assistant Superintendent for the Office of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Sylvia, and good morning, City Councilors. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to talk about the work of the Office of Health and Wellness. As we reimagine education for our students, we must continue to put their well-being at the center of our efforts to provide an equitable learning experience. Research is clear that health inequities contribute to opportunity gaps that interfere with learning. We know that promoting the social, emotional, and physical health and wellness of our students is foundational to their healthy development and readiness to learn, and must be a key part of our academic strategy. The Health and Wellness Office in the Division of Academics leads the district's effort to implement a whole child approach by coordinating and evaluating the wellness policy implementation. OHW also leads district direction on whole child instruction in Tier 1 social emotional learning, physical education, health education, and as well, OHW provides school supports through professional development, instructional coaching, technical assistance, and student-focused resources. On the slide, you will see summarized the many school supports that the Office of Health and Wellness provided this year. Next slide, please. As we reimagine learning, we must ensure that learning environments are engaging, health promoting, supportive, inclusive, challenging, and safe, thus meeting the needs of the whole child. By fully implementing the 8 components of the comprehensive BPS wellness policy in all classrooms and in all schools, we will create joyful learning environments that meet the unique needs of students and keep them engaged in learning. To do this work, OHW collaborates across the academic, student supports, equity, and operation divisions, many of the folks on the hearing today, to build the capacity of teachers, student support staff, and school leaders to create learning environments that promote student well-being, belonging, and empowerment. Our efforts to build educator capacity in this area are aligned with the Essentials for Instructional Equity, our BPS instructional framework. We know that students that are healthy, cared for, and empowered feel a sense of belonging, miss less days of schools, and are more likely to graduate and thrive. This year, 112 schools, or 91%, created wellness action plans as a part of their quality school plans. These plans outline the school's goals and activities for implementing the wellness policy and thereby creating learning environments that support the well-being of our students. We will celebrate the stories and outstanding efforts of schools at our 14th annual Wellness Award Ceremony and Summit on June 2nd, and we would love to have some of you join in the celebration. Next slide. As we emerge from the global pandemic, it is more obvious than ever that health matters. That means health literacy matters, physical literacy matters, emotional literacy matters, and a commitment to collective care matters. We are called to ensure all of our students have the knowledge, the skills, and the self-efficacy needed for lifelong well-being. Providing school health-related services is critical, but it's not enough. As we reimagine learning, we need to improve access to high-quality health education, physical education and physical activity, and social emotional learning, inclusive of culturally and linguistically sustaining practices, so that these programs are available for every child in every school. We want students to have the skills they need to be well. At the end of a K-12 BPS education, students need to be able to understand basic health information and make health-enhancing decisions like getting vaccinated, build healthy relationships, have the competence, the confidence, and the desire to be physically active, access healthcare for themselves and others, advocate for equitable access to health resources for themselves and their community. This whole child instruction will contribute to quality and length of life for students and their families. It will decrease rates of disease, disability, and death, including severity of disease for students and others. Whole child instruction is a part of an asset-based, participatory approach to securing opportunities and services that increase access and agency, the liberatory education Renee referenced in the hub school model. Equitable access to health education, physical education, and social emotional learning is a priority in the strategic plan and called for in the wellness policy. Our theory of action is that if we create healthier and more welcoming and affirming schools through improved instruction, equitable access to programs, aligned school supports and policy systems, and environmental change, then we will reduce health inequities and improve student learning and well-being. With that, I thank you, and I will turn it over, I believe, to the budget team.
Thank you. And to close this out, I just want to highlight that we have extensive information available online, including all the documents we released during the school committee hearings in February and March, as well as any of the city council presentations that we've given prior to today. All documents are translated into our 9 primary languages for BPS. I also want to highlight on the next slide, this is the third of our city council hearings. There are many more coming up in the next few weeks, opportunities for us to dive into different topics aligned to our strategic plan. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the chairwoman for questions from the council.
Great, thank you so much, Nate. I'll just note that on that last slide, if you might, for the next one, also add the May 25th at 6 p.m. BPS public testimony hearing, just to have that up for you. I want to note we were joined early on in the presentation by a number of my colleagues. So with us for a while now, additionally have been Councilor Ricardo Arroyo, District 5, Councilor Frank Baker, District 3, Councilor Ed Flynn, District 2, Councilor Michael Flaherty at large, and Councilor Liz Braden, District 9. we're going to jump right into questions. Obviously, there's a lot of material, and I'll hold mine to the end and go first and foremost to my vice chair, and again, also our education chair, Councillor Anissa Sabi-George. Councillor Sabi-George.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the superintendent and everyone here today for the very thorough conversation. I expect that we may do a few rounds of questions, so I'll get right to it. I'm very curious about the outreach that the Boston Public Schools did to students experiencing trauma, especially during this last year and through the majority of this last year in which our schools were closed and we didn't have physical proximity to our kids. How did BPS do during this last year, and how are we planning on continuing to address the challenges of trauma and engaging with families regarding trauma supports? And do we have systems in place that will provide families with additional resources and supports? I'm very, very concerned about the return to school, and as more and more kids are in our buildings, especially as we prepare towards September and thinking about the next fiscal year, do we have the resources and assets in place to support our kids with what I anticipate will be a very trying return to school and have some mental health implications for sure, both on our kids, and I think that also extends to our school communities, our educators, and those in our buildings.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that's a critical question, and part of the reason that we had launched the FY22 budget planning with the expansion of social workers at all schools. You may recall from last year that we had sort of thought about the 3-year, $100 million investment. First is the transformation schools was year one. Year two was going to be focused on high schools and supporting some high school redesign. And then year three was going to be the full expansion across for social workers. Given the pandemic, the superintendent reprioritized in terms of the timeline and shifted to make sure we had family liaisons and social workers available for this fall. And I think at that point, I didn't know if anyone on the team wanted to sort of comment on the efforts to sort of coordinate across those teams and make sure we have consistent quality and supports for students, because I think Council highlights some critical issues.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Sabi-George. I think, as I mentioned in one of my slides, I talked about all the different services that we have been providing, and those will continue to happen as we return. I think our family liaisons are frontline with families, so there are partners in this work, identifying, and teachers obviously as well, identifying students who might need more targeted supports. I also think this is about having some solid tier one practices in our buildings. I don't think we can go back to business as usual. We have to have some practices where we're making our students feel welcome and we're focusing on their well-being. And from there, really, again, using our teachers, all of the staff really, and identifying students that we are definitely particularly concerned about, that we might need some specialized supports or intensive supports. And I think that to Chief Cooter's point of like best practices, I think it's on us to do solid professional development to make sure that we are doing the same thing in every school building, right? And not have certain schools doing certain practices. So our school psychologists are also our partners in this work. So I think all of our mental health support folks are working hard to provide these services, and we'll continue to do that. As we bring in another 95 social workers, we'll have to onboard them quickly, which is definitely a large task, a huge task, and the same with the remaining family liaison. So that's something that we'll have to be working on. Well, we are already planning on and working on our plans for that. So,
if I may add to that, Ms. O'Hara, one of the things that our behavioral health services team they're not taking credit for is they've done a lot of work with our parent university team over the course of this year. Part of what we also are trying to do with families is destigmatize social, emotional, and mental health services. And so they've done a lot of work with our team in terms of coming to our various communities, having some deep conversations. I think our families, given everything that has happened, are much more open, and our families those conversations are both about the needs of the parents and the challenges they have, as well as the needs of their children. I think the pandemic has created an interesting space for different conversations. And we know that's important also because our young people in high school are telling us that, when they want to get support themselves, and we have to sign off on, their parents have to sign off on them, as Ms. O'Hara has been helping us with some things, that part of that piece is getting their parents to even understand the need for that. So they've been doing some great work there that I want to make sure they get credit for as well.
Great. For me, it's very important that we're working towards a full-time mental health provider in each one of our schools. So I'd like to know how many schools will not have, thinking ahead to September in FY22, how many schools will not have a full-time provider? And can you also tell me, do all of our schools still have a full-time nurse on staff?
So I'm going to ask Miriam Rubin, our budget director, to pull up, I think she has a list of the FTE allocations that could tell us how many schools don't have a full-time social worker allocation. For the nurses, we do have a 1.0 nurse in every school building. And so if there are schools, I think there's a handful of schools that share buildings. There may not be a full 1.0 per school community, but there is adequate staffing. And of course, the nursing team allocates it both on the FTE per building and then also on the acuity, the sort of needs of students in the building to make sure. So that nursing support is still part, that was a long answer to say, yes, the nurses are still part of our FY22 budget and are a critical part of our team going forward.
Yeah, and I can jump in with that number. So there's 26 schools that have a 0.5 social worker allocation for next year. And just a reminder about how we allocated, we used enrollment of number of students experiencing poverty at school to determine what their allocation would be.
No, I appreciate that. And so that those 26 schools, that's, so we're short 13, I had to do quick math this, all right, 13 providers. And to me, with this large investment that we're making, we really need to find the funds to right size that. So every school does have access to a full-time provider, because a student in crisis isn't, picking the time of day or the day of week that they're in crisis and may need access to resources. So Miriam, thank you very much for just being very specific about that. So my task is at hand. And then if someone could just explain to me briefly, this can be very brief because I see the gavel, what is the determination of a social worker versus a different type of provider? I don't personally have a preference. I just would like to understand why the focus on social workers as opposed to what a different credentialing. Anybody?
Sorry, I'm definitely going to look to the team for that. While I live with a mental health counselor, I would not dare to give my opinion in this area.
Thank you, and I apologize for my voice in advance. So very briefly, I think the rationale behind that was around the training that social workers receive in terms of thinking around systems and how ecological issues impact students, as well as the clinical expertise that they bring to the table and the rigorous training that they're provided. However, it is the job description is open to other licensed mental health clinicians to ensure that we're not limiting folks who are really qualified and understand our students and our families and are equipped to support them based on credentials that we know have historically precluded qualified candidates, particularly of color, and from disadvantaged means and backgrounds to obtain positions that could really be impactful for our students and families.
Good afternoon, Council Sub Judge. The only thing I would add to that is that, one of the things that we felt was that the social worker, given the role and previous roles of them, they're also the connector of services. So we felt that it was important for someone that has experience in that realm to be able to navigate the different resources and bring it all together to support the whole child.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Madam Chair. That's it for this round for me.
Great, thanks so much. Next up is Councillor Campbell, and then it'll be Councillor O'Malley. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Councillor Bach. I'm actually multitasking, so I have to go into a doctor's appointment. So I'll see my questions for this afternoon. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Councillor Campbell.
I guess I just got the buzzer.
Yeah, no, I hadn't said it. So, all right, Councillor O'Malley and then Councillor Rahia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for that very thorough overview. Nate, you have more than proven your Rosendale bona fides by beginning a quote of Fidel Castro to kick things off. So well done, my friend. And thank you to I don't know if the superintendent's still with us, but thank you for always being so accessible on this. I see a number of people with whom I've worked for a number of years, but also some new faces. Given the nature of this year, we haven't met in person, but it's good to see you. And one question, I apologize for not asking this in an earlier pre sort of working session, but Nate, could you provide all of us on the council with just sort of a list, and maybe someone else has already requested this, just a breakdown of individuals sort of in the central office or in the bowling building, sort of name, title, salary, just so we have a better understanding as we gear up for the vote. Thank you. There's been a lot to cover, so I'll try my best to get through it. I think one question that perhaps Councilors Flynn and Braden may get to as well is, as we talk about our highest need students and many of those who are out of district placement, I'm thinking about some specific constituents who are at the Perkins School of the Blind. Obviously, we're unable to take advantage of any remote schooling whatsoever, just given the nature of their challenges. And I believe, if I have this right, that the state has allowed for right now the cutoff age is, or the 22 is the age in which students can age out of BPS, and that has been extended for current 22-year-olds. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Councillor.
Oh, hi, Megan. And what about those students who might be 19 or 20 years old? They would not come under this. It's just a one-year thing currently, correct?
I'd have to get back to you on that, but I know this is a bill before the state legislature right now, and it's something that the superintendent has already extended to our families for the 22-year-olds, if that's an option they want to take. One of the challenges certainly is making sure that if they are over the age of 22, making sure that they don't lose their placement with the state. So it's definitely a unique, thing for families to decide on their own.
Yeah, and last week the council took action through the leadership of myself, Councilors Flynn and Braden, and supporting a resolution that supported Representative Coppinger's bill at the state level that you referenced, Megan. But I guess one request that I would make here, and we can follow up with more specificity offline, is there are certain situations where we would have someone in their late teens or early 20s who wouldn't quite be caught up in sort of this extension, but still would very much benefit from it. So I certainly think that, any student, particularly in the cutoff, could be in the mid to late teens, but any student that has such significant challenges, who's really missed out on a year through no fault of his or her own, to be able to extend that, it may need some state action, but I think there's also some wiggle room we could do as a district. So I look forward to seeing that codified in the months ahead.
I think we're committed to working with families, right, on figuring out solutions for their students. So I'll get you more specifics on that, but.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. And Dr. Granson, you talked a little bit about in your presentation the exam schools and what the invitations look like. And I think we all celebrate the fact that we're seeing exam schools that better reflect the vibrancy and diversity of the district. I'm curious, when the debate last fall centered around the 1 year temporary opting out of the test or not doing the test due to COVID conditions, there was talk about putting some support for students so that they're able to do well. Can you just briefly talk about that? Those who have been invited, who will be attending the 3 exam schools, just extra supports. I think you're muted, Doctor.
Thanks. Sorry about that, Councillor. Good morning. So we have our team working with all the exam school leaders to put together a program we're calling right now Strategies for Success. And it's going to have to do with preparing them to have a successful transition and entry into the exam schools. We'll focus on we've looked at, for example, language and Latin potentially, because it's something that exam school leaders, noted that if students can do well in that area, they're able to persist and be successful. And so that may be one of the components, or it may be provided at a later date. Math and ELA in areas of support, but really want to try to make sure it's tailored to students as much as possible. And so, we'll be working with students to see what the strengths are in the earlier part of the program and what the growth areas are, and then tailoring it to meet their needs.
No, I think that's fair, and I appreciate that, and I think it's a smart approach, and look forward to sort of the conversation as we get into the fall to see. I think we should be nimble, and it sounds like that's precisely the tact you're taking. And has the test been scheduled for October or November yet? Do we have a date?
So I would have to defer to my colleague Monica Roberts for that question.
That is my question. Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. We have not scheduled the tests for the fall yet. With the exam school task force is still meeting, and as you may know, part of their charge is to make a recommendation on a long-term policy to the school committee. The expectation is that will occur before the end of the school year, and I think at that point we will know how we are moving forward as a district. That said, we do already have a contract with NWEA for the MAP. So whatever direction that they so choose, including if there is a test, I think we'll be well equipped to do that. We're in constant communication with NWEA as well.
Okay, but to be clear, the action taken by the school committee last year was to suspend the test for 1 year.
For 1 year, yes.
So one would argue that the default would be that the test would be. I understand, and this is not the focus necessarily of this hearing, but I just want to flag this, and we'll continue to get a little more clarity from you and the superintendent going forward. But the pause was slated for 1 year, which of course was this past fall. And the gavel's up, so I will just briefly try to see, can anyone talk, as we talk about additional services and sort of transitioning back to school. I obviously welcome and really want to commend Counselor Sabi George and other counselors for really highlighting and supporting getting more social workers and really social and emotional supports. Can someone talk a little bit about, and this may go to my next round of questions, just the incredible trauma that this year has given all of us, particularly young people, particularly those who have been out of school for many times, and just sort of any sort of anticipatory challenges or supports that we can put in as students either are now returning to school or those who have opted out for the rest of the school year, for looking back, into September, what that's going to be like, the added anxiety, the added angst, the added concern that many students will be feeling.
I can jump in here, Councilor O'Malley. As you can imagine, it's been a harrowing year for young people. I think we anticipate that students will have a hard time coming back to school, just in readjusting to having to get up early, having to be in a large building with lots of people. I mean, it's been a long time for many. In addition to that, we have students who were already dealing with challenges around perhaps school anxiety and things like that. So this is only going to bring it to a whole other level, as you can imagine, right? And I think for many of the students, in particular in transition years, it's very difficult because they're walking into a building where they don't really know a lot of people. And so other than through Zoom. So I think we'll have to do some work around, again, the tier one interventions, whole school, of building community, building climate, really getting to know the adults and the other students in the buildings, and pushing that those supports, I think, will be really important and critical for our schools. So I can speak in terms of the social workers. I know that we are doing some professional development around lots of different things, but one of the things that we talk about is building the community in the school, at the school level. So what are those tier one supports? We're hoping to, like I said, as I said to you earlier, that we are committed to making sure everybody's trained in restorative justice practices, which is a great way of building that community, elevating the student voices so that they can express their needs in a way that they feel heard. And so that will be important and critical for us to establish.
Absolutely. We could have an entire hearing on this, but wanted to just close by thanking you, Carmen. We were honored to honor you and my favorite school social worker, my sister Christine, who's at the Madison Park Vocational Technical High School. Thank you for the great work you do every year. All of our school teachers and community, but particularly our social workers during this year. Thank you for your great work. And that's all.
Thank you, Counselor.
Thank you, Counselor O'Malley. I do just want to note that there is a different BPS hearing focused on exam school admissions and admissions and assignment in general. So I just want to say to counselors that I would prefer that we leave further aspects of that line of inquiry for that hearing. Next up is Counselor Mejia, and then Counselor Arroyo, and then Counselor Flynn. Counselor Mejia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. All right, so thank you for all of your hard work. BPS, really do appreciate you all leaning in. So I just have a few questions for round one. We're trying to find ways to convey this information to the public in a way that they understand. There really isn't a line item in the budget on quote unquote diversity, but it's something that everybody clearly wants. Can you explain how different line items in the budget come together to push an agenda of diversity in our hiring practices and curriculum and et cetera? If you could just break that down, that would be great. Continuing off of that, in your presentation, you mentioned using OAG policy as a logic model. First, can you explain what a logic model is for those people who are listening and just high level? And second, I think a lot of people are excited about the goals you're describing, but they can't see the dollars and cents attached to it. Can you just explain, for example, how dismantling structural barriers and providing greater access to opportunities is reflected in the budget? Last year, we saw a cut in social and emotional learning and an increase in social and emotional intervention. This year, we're seeing a proposed cut in social and emotional intervention and an increase in social and emotional learning. What's the reasoning for these numbers going back and forth? And then lastly, the BPS website lists members of the OAG task force. Could you explain how the members of the task force were chosen and how the role of the student voices can be included? It doesn't look like there's a student sitting on that task force. Is that the case? Just some clarity around that.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Thorough and great questions as always. I think the first thing I would just talk about is how the budget is structured. And one of the challenges we have is the budget as a sort of operating tool versus the budget as something that we want to communicate around our values. And so you flagged the diversity and inclusion or diversity as initiative as part of something that you'd want to communicate where the line items are. Our budget is structured in sort of three big accounts or three big data points. The first is the department, and that signals who's responsible for managing the work. In this case, with some of the diversity work, certainly Dr. Granson will be able to provide more clarity. There are those elements of it that are the responsibility and purview of his department, would show up in the funds. And then there is the work that is done throughout, that he's done a lot of work to embed the culture and practices of equity and inclusion in all of our work. And so his department managed funding would sort of show up and be in the category, but a lot of the work that we're all trying to embed wouldn't show up in any line item. The second, of course, is an account. An account really becomes the second way we structure our budget is around the account. Those are just meant to be sort of descriptions of what we purchase. And so in this case, it would be if we have contracts towards this work or FTEs towards this work, it wouldn't be sort of diversity FTE. It would instead be sort of modified through the program code. And the program code is our way of tracking sort of the initiatives and sort of historical spending across a number of categories. That may be where you saw the shift from one program code to another, and it's categorized differently. BPS, while we are presenting a unified budget, it's actually made up of 123 schools and 50 or so central office departments, all individual people making decisions about how they're aligning to the strategic plan. And sometimes things get coded differently year to year. That may be something you're picking up on. But certainly we evaluate whether or not we want to track something as a specific program each year and sort of think about how does this help us manage the budget and manage to our strategic goals, and then also how does it help us communicate to the community about what's happening. And that's probably a longer answer than you were hoping for, but it's sort of explains the sort of mechanics of it. In terms of the OAG task force and its composition and some of the other questions you had, I'll turn it over to Dr. Granson and see if you want to take those.
Good morning, Councilor Mejia. Thanks for the questions, and thanks, Nate, for sparing me of trying to explain how that works. But I guess I'll just add to what Chief Cooter said by providing a few examples. We, for the first time last year, were able to hire a retention specialist in our office of recruitment, cultivation, and diversity. That was a game changer, and I sort of explained a little of this earlier, because now we're able to do exit interviews for every person of color who leaves our district, and make ourselves available to them all. And we're able to talk to hundreds of people who have left over the last 2 years, and essentially to know more about what we need to do to sort of change the overall culture, either in schools or in central office, to prevent staff from leaving. I think another example is, and you mentioned the dismantling structural barriers, is in Office of Opportunity Gaps. There's a senior director of policy position, and I'll just say and use this opportunity to thank Harold Miller, who that's his role, but he also served as the interim assistant superintendent while we search for a replacement in our Opportunity Gaps office. And one of that role is funded and has the express purpose of working across central office departments to do that work around pushing the thinking of leaders that I described in the presentation and creating the goals and really having work plans that clearly do the work that dismantle the barriers. And so that's one support there. And then, of course, we have other staff in the office who provide training and support either around the racial equity planning tool usage, or around cultural proficiency, CLSP work in the district, and those things work hand in hand. Our Opportunity and Achievement Gaps Task Force is selected, like our ELL task force. All the task force are typically appointed by the school committee. And but I know that there's an extensive process in terms of engaging with community and others in terms of coming up with a list of names before the school committee makes those appointments. And we do have a BSAC representative. There's historically been one on the Opportunity and Achievement Gaps Task Force. And so that's a voice that we recently, I think the last meeting was the students' first meeting of this year, as they've had some turnover and change, but we value the student voice at that meeting.
Thank you. Is the gavel on me? I can't tell. Councilor Bach, do I have time for one more question?
If it's brief, it is up, but.
Yeah, so I do appreciate all of those answers. I'm constantly concerned about the community engagement piece. It seems like that is an area where we have an opportunity to really strengthen how community voice looks like. Because, you know, we go to these meetings, we say we're going to do X, Y, and Z. I've been participating in some of the equity roundtables, and there seems to be a disconnect with what we're communicating and what people are hearing and how they walk away from those conversations. And at some point, I just think that it would be great to even have exit. Sorry, Google is talking. That to have some exit surveys. Did you feel like do you fully understand the discussion that was had here? It just feels like there's always this tension between the community and the district, and then the district and the school principals, and the school principals and the teachers. And I just feel like we just need to, as a district, kind of like everyone needs to get on the same page, and everybody has to have the same conversation. And I think that it seems like we're always drawing from the same usual suspects in terms of who's at the table. And I think that we have an opportunity to really expand that tent and bring in a few folding chairs so that we're allowing the next generation of parents who aren't highly engaged to actually help inform some of these decisions, because they're the ones who are experiencing a lot of these issues that we're talking about here today. So I just think for Monica, you know, in terms of a lot of the family engagement work that you're doing is working in partnership with identifying some of the parents that are not so engaged to help build that pipeline. And then I think that, you know, as much as I appreciate the thoroughness of the PowerPoint presentation, I do still believe that, you know, everything sounds so beautiful, and I just sometimes it's hard to crack the Da Vinci Code in terms of really what's our return on investment going to look like, and how is by doing X, Y, and Z going to impact the lives of children. Like I like things to be broken down in smaller little chunks, because these big aspirational goals are aspirational goals, right? And I feel like we need to come back to these public hearings. I'm going to be looking for more specifics and details and things that could be broken down in little chunks and that are a little bit more digestible for folks. So that's what I'm going to ask for in the next kind of go round, just because I think we have a lot of parents who are, obviously we're doing this at a time that educators can't participate, students are in class, and parents are not here, right? So here we are holding a hearing about the issues that are impacting these families and students, and none of them are here to participate. So I just think that that's something that we all need to do a better job at in terms of engagement. And that's all I have to say. Thank you. And thank you for the indulgence, Councilor Bach. I really do appreciate you allowing me to ramble as long as I did. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Next up is Councilor Arroyo. Councilor Arroyo.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm going to get right into the questions instead of going through the long list of thank you for being from here and so on and so forth. What of measurable progress, if any, has been made in reducing curriculum bias? How does this fiscal year 2022 budget specifically address this? And I also need more detail on who does curriculum bias review, if you can give me a step-by-step process and who's involved and how often.
I can get us started, and then if some of my colleagues want to add. It is definitely a cross-functional work across many teams in central office and schools. As I have mentioned, we have a framework that we utilize in order to, to guide us with this work. And it's definitely been a priority in the past, and moving forward as we re-engage and reimagine how we want to engage students, it will continue to have front and center interest for us, and to make sure that we provide for our teachers the materials that they need and for our students. Is there anyone else who could comment around dollars?
I would just add in terms of the funding. So last year, as you know, we rolled out a literacy initiative and had funding set aside to be able to purchase new curriculum in grades K through 8. Those funds were rolled forward as part of this to be able to continue to do an investment in curriculum. And I will also say that it is a topic that has come up when we start to think about some of the federal relief funds, as we start to think about those investments that can outlast a single year and can have transformative change on the district. While not always sort of the most exciting thing to talk about, sometimes the sort of basics of curriculum and the necessary support and professional development that needs to come to the teachers can be really important and high leverage change for the district.
I think curriculum is great to talk about. It's very exciting for me. So on that front, just how often is this process in terms of curriculum bias review? Is this triggered by teachers at the ground level? Like the steps and processes for this are still sort of murky and mysterious to me. I know that some people in central office look at curriculum, but how are we flagging this? How often is this being flagged? What does that actually mean when you say you look at curriculum? We just get more into the meat of that.
Yeah, we want to establish cycles of review. We know that more than likely many of our materials have sort of a shelf life of probably no more than 5 years. So we need to engage in an ongoing cycle of reviewing those materials. And as teachers utilize the materials, they certainly flag any concerns that they may have so that we can address them immediately. And as I mentioned, there were reviews conducted for English language arts and Spanish language arts. And we will continue with all of the other content areas and certainly engage teachers, principals, and central office staff.
Thank you for that. And the second question here is about the code of conduct for BPS. Does BPS have a breakdown of code of conduct violations, and does it track violations throughout the year?
Good morning, Councilor Arroyo. So, yeah, we're required by law to review code of conduct data and incidences that occur. And we do that on a monthly basis with some of our team members and school leaders. I'm not sure what exactly you'd want to look for, but we can, if you
does BPS have the ability to provide a breakdown by gender, race, and ethnicity for codes of conduct violations, as well as could they provide that breakdown by type of violation?
There's some of that we can do and some we can't do, but we can let you know specifically what's possible, and then we can kind of go from there. So
is there a reason why you can't do some of them? Is it just because it's not data that's tracked, or is it protected? What's the reason?
Combination of both, but there are areas where we do track that we're allowable and we do connect the schools about, like such as location of incidents, type of incidents. We do have the participants who are involved, and we do those pieces, but some may be more complicated to track because of protecting folks that are involved, students that are involved, witnesses, victims, that kind of thing.
Okay. Now another question for folks, and I think this will probably be the last question that I have for this round, because I think it'll probably take up most of the time. But in terms of, I know we've talked about how many nurses we'll have in every building and social workers, but how many BPS schools will not have a family liaison next year?
All BPS schools will have a family liaison position for next year.
School psychologists?
I don't know if, Miriam, if you have the number of school psychologists per school.
I don't have the exact number. I know Andrea is on the call. Maybe she can answer broadly while I look.
Hello. Yeah, 31 schools will have a full-time school psychologist next school year. The remaining schools will share a school psychologist across 2 or occasionally 3 schools.
So let me try and make sense of this. So there's 31 full-time school psychologists, and I'm assuming specific schools. Those same school psychologists aren't the ones being shared in these other school districts, correct?
Right, so 31 school psychologists are full-time in their one school community.
Yeah.
Then another school psychologist may work in 2 schools.
3 schools?
Yeah.
And what's the total number of school psychologists?
For this year, we have 80. For next year, we will have 91, as 10 schools have chosen to use their social work funds to increase their school psychology time.
Okay, then how many guidance counselors do we have per school?
I defer to someone else to answer that.
I think we'll need to come back to you with the breakdown of guidance counselors as part of that. So are there other positions as well that we can pull the information for and have for you? I think we talked about social workers, school psychologists, guidance.
You definitely got the social workers covered, school psychologists covered, family liaison covered. You have one in every school. And then I think the only one is guidance counselor. That's outstanding.
Great. We can have that information for you.
So I'm going to end my questions there, Kenzie, or Madam Chair. It's just you have such a fun name, Kenzie. I just like saying that.
That's all good. That's good because I had neglected to raise the gavel, but you had 19 seconds left. So
I came in under. I want that.
Yes, technically true. All right, sorry. Next up is Councillor Flynn, and then it'll be Councillors Flaherty and Braden. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Balk, and to the BPS team that is here. Wanted to focus some of my questioning or comments on the very difficult year for the AAPI students. A lot of hate crime, violence, intimidation. But as our students go back to class, what type of services, outreach are we providing the students? Are we providing the teachers and the parents as well, the families? So that's an important issue to me because that's an important issue to my constituents. So want to see what our plan is and making sure that we're doing everything we can for our AAPI students and families.
I'm happy to jump in, Counselor. We have been sharing resources across our teams, both social workers and school psychologists, to use at the school level. We have collaborated with folks from the office of the OEL office to do some parent conversations and hosting parents to talk about this and connecting them to resources as well. And really as a district, we have shared resources for all, including teachers, again, doing some of these interventions in the classroom, allowing the space for students to be able to talk about their experiences and elevating their voices. So and that will continue. It's used for AAPI incidents and also AAPI hate incidents. It's also, we use really for lots of the traumas that our students are experiencing in different ways. So the same sort of deployment of resources that we do with the mental health folks, but again, for teachers and again, to families, so.
Thank you. Thank you. Just want to follow up with that. What are we doing this summer for our Asian students and Asian families? It's a critical time this summer. Obviously, the pandemic is almost over, but we're still seeing a lot of troubling incidents of violence against the Asian community. I guess my question is, over the next 2 months, I want to make sure that we include and engage the Asian students in as much services and outreach as we can. I don't want to wait 2 months and then start the process of helping our Asian students when they return to school.
Good morning, Councilor Flynn. What I would say to that is that, so this summer, we're in the process of planning a robust summer opportunity programming for all of our students, including the Asian community. And what we've done for the summer, for anyone that's engaged with us that way, is provide additional social workers so that they're also engaged in supporting our students, and also finding a various amount of social emotional opportunities and physical activities as well to keep folks engaged and healthy, and making sure that they have a trusted adult to connect with while they're in our programming. We're also supporting the city with advertising a lot of the summer job opportunities that they could be involved in, and just making sure they stay connected and are just aware of a lot of the opportunities for the summer. So this includes our feeding program. This includes new opportunities around physical activity and health-related services. So that's our approach for now.
Okay. I would like to make sure that we continue that outreach and hiring the right people also in BPS that can speak Cantonese and in Mandarin. I think we can do a better job on that outreach. I know it's difficult at times to recruit people that can speak Cantonese and Mandarin, but I just want us to continue trying and working on that. But I often felt like some of the Chinese students are often overlooked in our city. And I want to make sure that BPS doesn't do that and they provide them with the same resources, opportunities as other students as well. So just want to make sure I have a commitment that BPS understands the importance of this issue, because my constituents deserve the same level of support as any other students as well.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. And we do share that sentiment, and we look forward to continue working with you on those endeavors.
Okay, one final question. If there's any issues that we're not making progress on any of these issues, can you let me know? And I can try to help or try to get resources if I can. I'm not going to be upset if we're not making progress. I'm going to be upset if I don't know about it. So, you know, if there are issues and we have challenges, please let me know. And I want to be part of that solution in make progress in helping our Asian students. Councilor Block, that's all I have. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Councilor Flynn. Next up is Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, thanks to the superintendent's team, CFO Nate Cooter and Dr. Charles Granson, and the folks that presented this morning. For me, closing the opportunity and the achievement gap is the most important thing that we can do for our students. A critical part of doing so is to give our students access to opportunities that can put them on pathways to succeed, and then ensuring that we're meeting the students' needs where they're at and providing adequate support to all of our students, academic, emotional, social, et cetera. So for me, kind of where Councilor Flynn left off is for me, it's about deliverables. So can someone provide more information on plans, to close the opportunity and achievement gap, as well as the provisions around wraparound services so we get students back on track, particularly because of the pandemic and arguably a lost year of learning, as well as the increased need for trauma crisis and mental health support, and how it fits into the strategic plan in commitment one in general. That's sort of the first issue I have, and how we're holding ourselves to those deliverables. And then the next piece, my next question is the decline in enrollment this year has been very troubling for me. So I guess, how are we funding our schools to ensure that schools that are losing students do not see more cuts to funding? I'm happy to see that there's been an investment in family liaisons that reflect the language and cultures of the communities, but oftentimes families reach out because they don't understand how to navigate the system. And I guess will each school have a family liaison, and what is the progress on that hiring process? So that should be first couple, 2-3 questions, Madam Chair, and I'll listen to the answers.
Thanks for that, Councilor Flaherty. And I'll just really quickly sort of answer a few of your first questions. I think, one of the things we do in terms of our strategic plan implementation, which is aligned and fully integrated with our opportunity and achievement gaps policy. On page 49, there's a sort of explanation of how we will go about monitoring and implementation and holding ourselves accountable, and public accountability was a major theme in the strategic planning process and with the adoption of the plan. The superintendent committed to quarterly reports to the school committee on progress. COVID did sort of slow us down and throughout that effort, but we're coming back hopefully by this summer with an annual report. And then from there on, the quarterly reports will proceed. And this will be a sort of public document and dashboard that shows how we've made progress on the priorities outlined in a strategic plan. Internally, we have departmental work plans and goals. And so each department and division, they've identified what they're going to do to close opportunity and achievement gaps from their work and vantage point. Some of the initiatives that you might have heard of and be familiar with are work that we're doing around implementation of the Look Act. I believe that's coming before school committee soon, and so you'll hear more about that. Work around mass core adoption, which will be in school committee tomorrow, which is a key strategy around closing opportunity and achievement gaps and ensuring equitable access to high quality curriculum and instruction across every BPS school. Our high school redesign efforts is about providing opportunities to students in a number of areas, career and technical education, advanced placement, international baccalaureate, dual enrollment. So those are opportunities that don't currently exist at every high school. In the superintendent's vision in the high school secondary office, they have that work that I believe they'll be sharing in the next couple of weeks as well. And so those are the things we're looking at as deliverables. Of course, there's the policy or the plan, and then it's about our implementation and delivery of it, which will show up in our quarterly reporting of the strategic plan progress.
And obviously, and just to opine briefly on that, obviously we're in a global economy, and so deliverables for me are, our children getting into the, we boast of having the best colleges and universities in the world, and not enough of our kids are getting into those schools. So that's a barometer for me, as is, when CEOs are moving their companies here, and bringing, those high-paying jobs here, and those jobs aren't trickling out to the neighborhoods, to our residents, particularly graduates of BPS. That's also another barometer for me. So I want to make sure that we're holding ourselves to the highest academic standards as possible, and that we're helping folks gain access to those opportunities. And that's one of our most important fundamental obligations is the education of our children. And we need to continue to put our best foot forward and provide the best opportunities for our kids. And it's not a one size fits all, unfortunately. It's not how it works. And so we need to make sure that we're doing the best we can to get kids up to grade level. And we also need to also be there for those that need, those AP courses and advanced work studies to help them sort of achieve their highest height as well. So it's a combination of all of those factors, and keeping in mind again that some of the goals that we've set for ourselves, I think we tend to fall short, and we need to be doing better as we move forward.
And Councilor, I wanted to return to one of your earlier questions, because I think it does give us the opportunity to highlight something that we invested a significant amount of money in. You had mentioned enrollment declines and the concerns around how those enrollment declines can lead to a change in the student experience. This year, we did more to support schools outside of weighted student funding than we have in prior years. $18.5 million went to stabilize school budgets that would normally have fluctuated because of enrollment in a weighted student funding district. And so what we really aimed to do was ensure that at all schools, the student experience was maintained. And that was a big commitment. It is a big risk for us going into next year, quite honestly, if we don't get enrollment back. And so part of that is, how do we create pro-enrollment strategies, and how do we make this a system that people want to go into? And I think that gets to your second question, which is difficulty navigating the system. And maybe because it's lunchtime, I was thinking about, when I first moved to Boston, I couldn't consistently find Pizzeria Regina in the North End. It felt like every time I tried to go there, I took a wrong turn. And that's annoying when it comes to pizza places, but it can have devastating impact on the city when it comes to navigating BPS. We have so many different grade configurations, and a system that has people switching schools for different programs or what they think is the opportunity that they need for their students. And what we need to do as a system is make sure we have predictable pathways and guaranteed foundations for quality at all schools, so that parents know that by enrolling in any school in the district, that they're going to be enrolling in a place where their child can be successful, their student can be successful. And that sort of predictable pathways, consistent experience across is something the superintendent has been focused on, and is one that we have plans to continue to invest in, both in terms of our operating budget and in some of the changes you'll hear about in our capital planning as well.
Madam Chair, do I have one follow-up?
Yep, quickly.
So, Nate, obviously, supporting of legislation pending at Beacon Hill to give students with disabilities an optional repeat year. What are we seeing with BPS with respect to optional repeat years for all students, quite frankly, for those that have disabilities and for those that do not? Are parents electing to have their children get, I guess, an additional year of instruction and repeat their current grade, feeling that they may have lost a year? And if so, what, if any, impact will that have in terms of our school assignment process?
Yeah, it's a great question. Having gone through that with my own child at the start of this year, I know that that can be both a challenging question for families and also one that can be, it needs to be very student driven. This is the time of year when we would start to see schools and families really solidify their plans around repeating. I think what we have talked about, and you heard people refer to a strong tier 1 intervention. I think that's what we do for all students. What we need to do is approach next year around what is the unfinished teaching. What is it that we didn't get to as a system? And because I think there are a lot of students who have material and instruction that they need to catch up on. The impact on assignment, it is interesting that in a typical year, if we saw an increase in retentions, that would then change who could be assigned to different schools because, there's sort of a finite capacity. I think in this year where we have, as I mentioned, the 18.5 million, we've built extra sort of capacity in the system for students, that there is more flexibility and we don't see an impact right now on assignment. I don't have any of the exact numbers on retentions. I can ask the team to pull that to see if we've seen an increase in it. But I know that the superintendent has really emphasized not using retention as sort of the quick fix for students, that we really need to think about approaching our instruction differently and it being about supporting all the students and assessing where they're at and preparing to meet their needs in the fall.
Councilor Flaherty, the time's elapsed. Is that all right?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Nate and Dr. Granson.
Thank you. Councilor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to everyone for your presentation this morning. I had a few questions. In terms of the hub schools, how many hub schools do we have in the district that do more intensive wraparound services? And what's the relationship of those schools with local community health centers? With the closure of Jackson Man next anticipated closure of Jackson Man next June in 22, what additional mental health and counselling services will be added to support the families during that transition? Jackson Man has a significant population of students with autism, and I'm just wondering about what you anticipate in terms of additional supports to help with that transition. It's these students require, they rely on predictable routines, and consistency are really helpful in their education. So it's really critically important that we get that piece right. Also, in terms of related service providers, how many students who are not enrolled in BPS require services of related service providers in parochial schools, charter schools, and other independent schools? And does the BPS get federal funding to provide related services for those students in Boston? And if so, how much federal funding is allocated to support the related services for those students who may have an IEP but do not attend a BPS school? I think that's all I have for the moment.
I'm going to ask that on the last question about related services and special education services, if we can hold that question to this afternoon's hearing. This afternoon's hearing in terms of closing achievement gaps will also include Ethan Domelmont-Burns, our assistant superintendent for special education, who his team is definitely going to be better prepared to answer that. The short answer is yes, we do. We are required to provide related services to students in private and parochial schools who are Boston residents. And I'm definitely going to turn it over to Leach and her team around the hub schools. Before I do that, I'm just going to quickly around Jackson Man and support for students. Part of our rationale for announcing this early in the process, this early in the year of a closure around a school, is that it allows us time to work with families and understand what supports they need for their students and prepare that information before the school committee makes any decisions or ultimate votes on school closure. And so part of our process is to identify supports for students transitioning. We have heard and we've learned from other school closures that the academic supports along with the social emotional supports are important so that we know that we assess the students' current transcript, what their needs are, and then when they transition to a new school, that new school, the receiving school, picks up their services. For the students in the program, the ABA program, which are predominantly students with autism, you're absolutely right to flag that this is more at-risk population in terms of the impact of those transitions. And our special education teams can be working one-on-one through the IEP process and with those families to make sure that they are supported in the transition, because that is a group that is particularly vulnerable in these sort of school transitions. And so with that's the sort of one school specific. I think your other question is sort of to start was around our hub school strategies and the schools that are part of that as well. And of course, in your district, the Gardner Pilot School is of course a great example of a hub school model. And with that, I'll turn it over to Alich.
Thank you. I think, Counselor, your question was how many schools will in total? Is that right?
Yeah. How many hub schools do you have? And then what's their relationship with, in terms of wraparound services with the wider community in terms of community health centers or libraries or whatever?
Thank you for that question. So it's a total for this pilot. We'll have a total of 14 schools, including the Gardner, as Nate mentioned. In terms of the work around community health centers and libraries, the conversation has already started around the health centers in particular. We're working in really close partnership with our partners in Pt.II around our school-based community health centers, and then thinking through how to better link and learning from the work of the Gardner, for example, on how to better link our community health centers. That's work that we're doing collaboratively with our health services team. So certainly it all kind of aligns with the work that we're all trying to do in terms of really creating real community support for our students. That's in terms of community health center. The other part was around libraries. And I'm really glad you asked that question, because part of what we want to make sure we do, again, pushing back against more one-stop shop models and thinking more around how do we increase access to our families and students around the incredible resources that our city already provides, is thinking about in spaces where maybe libraries aren't present or aren't as robust, how do we make those more deliberate links excuse me, with our libraries in our communities. So that's work that we're starting working with our director of library services here in BPS to then link to the larger city work. So it's in progress, and I appreciate you inquiring about it.
Thank you. Madam Chair, do I have any more time?
Yes, you have, like another minute.
Another minute. I really feel, this is more of a comment than a question. I really feel that the BPS needs to do a better job really showcasing all the great work that they do. We are in a competitive sort of market. The BPS is competing for students with independent schools and charter schools. And I really feel that we need to do more about just really holding up the incredible work that our public schools are doing and making this, to Nathan's point, more of an obvious choice for a parent to send their children to really good schools in Boston. So thank you so much, Madam Chair. I had another question, but it seems to have fallen off the edge of my sheets. So I'll find it and come back later if possible. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Braden. I think we were joined by Councillor Edwards, but I think she may be having connectivity issues. So I will jump in with my questions, and then we will do a second round of questions. I'd ask colleagues to just be ready so that we can move through them quickly, just because we got 2 hearings today. So I want to thank the team for, there were lots of answers to a bunch of my questions in that presentation in the first hour. And so just a few follow-ups on that. I guess my biggest question is, it's sort of like the moment of the start of the school year in September, and I think others have sort of also gestured towards this, but it feels to me like we know that our students have so many needs that have been exacerbated coming out of this pandemic. And part of the proposal to add to the social workers and family liaisons is about having, like, you know, just a whole set of sort of hands around our students, right, for that kind of wraparound effect. I'm sort of trying to think about what the sort of moment of diagnostic assessment in the first few weeks of September is going to look like, because I can imagine a world in which, you know, a teacher gets their class roster, and then, I mean, normally, right, they spend the first few weeks trying to sort of figure out, where are these students on my class roster, like sort of where are they in their learning journey, what's going on at home, et cetera. And it feels like we're going to find out in September, okay, this set of students in my class, you know, could really use the mental and emotional support. I've got some folks who stopped going to school last year and they're not really feeling connected to the school community and they're not showing up. So there we have like an attendance, you know, from jump problem. And, you know, and over here, you know, this person had really like done well previously with somebody standing over their shoulder, helping them with math. And last year it's clear that like learning math remotely didn't work for them. So I'm just kind of like, think about, we have all these kind of across the board supports, but what is BPS's plan for kind of surging in that individualized support? I just think there's going to be so much that we don't yet know about where our students are at. So I realize that's kind of a big picture question, but I'm sort of trying to imagine how these teams get operationalized around our students in the fall.
Yeah, I think that's a great question and an important one. I'm realizing now as we go to answer this, I believe Sylvia, I don't know if I think she may have had to step away. Oh, we're back. Wanted to just talk about, part of this is about making sure that we create systems and structures or supports for teachers, because those closest to the students will be best able to assess what they need. And I think that's part of the challenge as we start to think about the availability of the ESSER funding and how we want to use that in the next year. We both want to be ready with supports, but we also want to build the right supports and tailor it exactly to the right students. But you know, in terms of the diagnostic tools being used and plan supports, I'm going to turn it over to Sylvia to see if she wants to add.
Yes, thank you. I would say that it's very important that we start from a universal view of Tier 1, both in academics as well as social-emotional supports for students. So we're planning on summer learning for teachers, an opportunity for teachers to prepare, you know, ahead of time on how they're going to reconnect with their students, reconnect with their families. We know that it's going to be relationship building is going to be crucial, and being able to diagnose very quickly where students are at academically, and as well as in terms of additional needs for support. And that's why we have mentioned that we do have assessments available, and that we're continually monitoring the quality of those for bias and for the quality of information that would provide to us. Is there anything else that any team member would add to this?
I would just add that building off of priorities and focuses around the well-being of students from last year, the guidance that we would want to give and continue to support schools are the idea that we do need to implement structures focused on student and adult relationships, and consider really extending community building phases of reopening. Schools always do that. They know they have to meet their students and get to know them, but we know that because, as Carmen said, Tier 1 is going to be so important, we need to establish that as what we would expect to see in schools. We have seen schools institute weekly or daily rituals on a whole school or a whole grade level or whole classrooms where they're building relationships between teachers and students through various activities. And so we would want to see that again. I think deepening social emotional learning skills and competencies by integrating them into other subject areas is something that we've been working on with schools, and we'd want to see that deepen. From my perspective, health education and physical education are two content areas where students get to have some, experience, think about themselves, reflect on how they're doing and how they've been doing, and then move and have some enjoyment as a part of that joyful school. So I think with a full, really approach to the whole child is an important more than ever as we reopen.
Yeah, definitely. No, I just don't want, I'm just thinking about, and obviously this all comes down to school leadership and stuff. It's just that we're throwing in all these supports who are also going to be new to their school communities. So I just feel like we're going to have these new social workers, these new family liaisons. Both of those are somewhat entrepreneurial roles. And you're learning how to navigate a whole system. And then a bunch of new students, whatever our normal transition years are, we have actually 2 transition years worth of new students in many cases, in the sense that they haven't had a year in the building. So just trying to think about how it, like the actual kind of tracked response, like, okay, have we figured out how many kids need this type of support and are we getting it to them, doesn't kind of fall between the barrels of like all this well-intentioned capacity. That's, and with 120, sorry, I'm forgetting the number 4, is it? School communities, like obviously there's going to be individualized leadership plans on this. I'm just trying to think about how the district's supporting on that.
If I may, I might just add to that. Our schools all have school support teams, and part of that is really the space for bringing together these positions and resources to think about what are the supports our students need, but also in their quality school plans, they are outlining not just the academic supports that our school community needs, but also the social emotional supports, and what that then means as an extension for the family engagement and ways that they're supporting and engaging families. And those parties are at the table as well as the school site council. So you're really thinking about your school community and represented stakeholders at the table in that process. And I think part of what you're describing is kind of how do we make sure the coordination is happening on the ground, and that happens in I think the school support team spaces. And I would say at the central office level, our school superintendents are doing a really great job of supporting and connecting with our schools. They are in schools every day, and I think working with school leaders around making sure that work is happening, but also flagging where there are challenges, and certainly working with each of us in our respective places where additional support may be needed for our positions.
And in terms of specifically, do we have any particular surge of support or strategy planned around our high school students? I mean, just based on the sort of publicly reported data about us having more difficulty getting our high school students in for parts of this year, I'm imagining a student who's sort of fallen off attendance this year, maybe they're, a junior, and then they get socially promoted, and then they come in, and again, they're not feeling that sense of connection. It just feels like for the senior class, we could have some real challenges if we're not very intentional. So is there anything in particular we're doing just around that end?
I will look into that, but thank you for bringing that up because it is very important.
All right. Well, yeah, it would be great to hear more at future hearings about that. With our high schoolers, it feels like we're going to have a lot of support that all our students need, but we have a longer runway with the younger ones, and we don't have that with the older ones. So.
Yeah, and Counselor Bach, just to add in, our hearing on the 18th is going to focus more specifically on high school, so we'll be sure to incorporate your questions there as well.
Okay, that'd be great. I forgot to set a timer on myself, so I want to be cautious. So I will stop my questions there. for now, and go back up to the top. And I think I noted this already, but we have been joined by Councilor Edwards. She's going to forego questions just since she was late. Next up is Councilor Asabi George. Councilor Asabi George, do you have second round questions to ask? I'm sure
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll try to be brief. I would love to hear a little bit more about the work that the district's doing to support students who are experiencing homelessness. And we know in particular the struggle that many of our families have faced over this last year because of COVID-19, because of schools being closed and, hybrid learning now taking place, and, the slow return of students back to the classroom or with the option to return back to the classroom. How are we supporting families? I know, Brian, you did a little bit of a review in the PowerPoint, but I'd love to hear more about the work of HERN, especially over this last year, the role of family liaisons in supporting students experiencing homelessness, and wondering about school autonomy around some of the funding that they're receiving to support students, both in relation to COVID and our response, but also just in general.
Sure. So, as it relates to looking forward to next year, so we do have a proposal out there that will go in front of the ESSER Commission, where we're looking to have dedicated academic mentoring and tutoring supports, with students experiencing homelessness being one of the priority groups for that effort. We're also looking to continue the external partnerships with case management and wraparound supports as part of that funding proposal. Schools are completely autonomous in terms of the use of the homelessness investment dollars that are allocated to their school budget. Of course, they have to follow the district's purchasing and procurement guidelines in the use of those dollars, but they're certainly autonomous in terms of the use of the funding. We do have some quality assurance frameworks, both in terms of the budget tracking, so the expenditure and use of dollars, as well as schools being required to submit project plans to just indicate how they plan to use the funds, whether they need any additional consultation or support in the implementation process in connection to resources. We work closely with, of course, the family liaisons and the social workers. Part of our focus this year and moving forward has been to make sure that we're distributing information about resources and training opportunities, particular to students and families experiencing homelessness, to key work groups, which includes the social workers, the family liaisons, school nurses, guidance counselors. We do have a designated school-based homeless liaison, at least one at every school across the district. That is a designation made by the school leader. Many of those folks are family liaisons or social workers. We have a number who are guidance counselors, school nurses, community field coordinators, and other key roles. Oftentimes, the person who is interested in that role at the school level is someone who is very passionate about supporting precariously housed students and families, or someone who has, some prior experience with that work.
Great, thank you for that. And have we looked at the impact of COVID-19 in particular this past year, what impacts that's had maybe on the increase in number? Has that impacted the numbers of families and children, students experiencing homelessness? And maybe you could talk for a moment about the family-led stability pilot or project now, and maybe the impacts of increasing that in the next school year, what that might have on as hopefully a positive impact on our kids.
Yeah, so we haven't actually seen, so Boston's been at a crisis level in terms of housing insecurity. It has one of the highest rates of family homelessness in the nation. But we have not seen a catastrophic increase in homelessness based on our data throughout the pandemic. And our belief is that part of that is because of the state's moratorium on evictions, the city's considerable funding that's gone towards rental relief that has been refunded a number of times, increase in funding for rapid assistance for families in transition, RAP, as well as the housing voucher partnership that we've had with Boston Housing Authority. And of course, we're regularly communicating and distributing resources to key support staff at the school level so they can easily connect families with housing stabilization services, funding, programming, et cetera. The family-led stability pilot continues to be a key initiative and really an incubator for the way we can innovate and have real systems change in terms of working across agencies. We were able to fully integrate the support of those partners with the district-wide housing voucher initiative. So we continue to look at both district-wide efforts as well as regional and school-based partnerships, because we feel like both have to be delivered in a way that all partners are on the same page. We're coordinating supports, and we're able to really fully utilize all the resources across the city to connect those with our students and families.
Great, I appreciate that. And I would say it is very unfortunate that we do have the highest rates of students and families experiencing homelessness. But I will add, we are the only state with the right to shelter. So we do a good job, if there is a silver lining to that, supporting our families, but also counting our families. I think that many other states and municipalities don't provide any services to families and students experiencing homelessness. We do that here in both in Massachusetts and certainly in the city. And that could be part of why we unfortunately have that distinction. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone. And I look forward to this afternoon's hearing. That's it for this morning's questions for me.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Sabi George. I think up next, I'm just scanning up my list here. I think it'll be going next to Councillor Mejia. Yeah, Councillor Mejia, you have the floor.
Thank you. So for round two, I just kind of want to make a quick note here that, it often feels like schools in the suburbs phrase schools with smaller attendance as a good thing, and saying, oh, look how good our students to teacher ratio is, or look at how much space we have for labs and creative space. But in Boston, it's always seems like it's an excuse to shut schools down. And so I just think that there is something for us here to learn and to consider as we continue to have these conversations. And I also think it's important to highlight the traumatic impact that school closures have on families, particularly those who have already experienced displacement and already have a lot of instability. So I just really think that as we start thinking about the social and emotional well-being of our students, that we're really super mindful of the impact that these school closures have on the entire community. It's just something for us to think about. And if we're going to continue to do that, then we need to budget accordingly to ensure that we're able to address the trauma. But I have two questions. In regards to the Code of Conduct implementation, could you provide us with some data around Code of Conduct violations by demographics? What percentage of Code of Conduct violations were issued to white students compared to students of color? And then I'm also curious, how are we using the new federal funding to help create trauma-informed services for students who need help readjusting to back in-person classes? I can just speak for myself. My daughter is a BPS student, and the transition from home, remote learning to being back in school has been traumatic for her, just in terms of just like the new norms of just how to show up in school. I'm not sure what transition plans have been put in place to help acclimate students to being back in person. Just kind of like those learning habits have been lost. And so I'm just curious, like, how are we dealing with that? And we could do the same for our teachers, who had to bear the burden of making all of these adjustments. Just curious about how we are allocating funding to support these transitions.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And Councilor Arroyo had asked earlier about the demographic breakdown for code of conduct violations. And our Deputy Superintendent, Sam DePina, will follow up to be able to provide that information to you so you have it.
But in general, I'm just wondering, I know you may not have those exact numbers, but what have been some of the trends that you have seen? Can you at least give us some sense of trends? Because having worked in the education space, what I always see is that students of color are usually disproportionately the ones who are usually the ones going to the principal's office. And so I'm just curious if you have any insight as to why that is.
Yeah, I apologize. Mr. DePina had to leave the hearing at noon. I don't know if somebody else on the team would feel comfortable sort of speaking about code of conduct violations. Hearing none, I would just say you also asked questions about how the federal funding will be used in particular to do trauma informed. I think you're right to highlight, I think in any ways, I think, sort of best case scenario for students coming back, those who have adjusted best are still really trying to figure out how to re-enter. Having gone through that same routine with me and my kids being back in person, it comes up in subtle ways and in obvious ones when you're trying to figure out that. Our plan for ESSER funding, the superintendent's ESSER commission starts their first public meeting on Thursday after, after school. And they're going to be discussing different ways. And I know trauma-informed supports is one that will likely come up. And then we will put together an application for ESSER funding that is due in July. In the meantime, what we tried to do was prioritize general fund spending for FY22. On those resources, we wanted to make sure we're staffed up and ready when the students come back in the fall. And that's why the focus was on maximizing investments in school-based positions for family liaisons and social workers. And it's in the combination of the two, coordinated with the team around hub schools, that the social workers will be able to both provide supports to students and be able to do sort of the whole school supports. And then the family liaisons are there to help connect with city resources and supports as well. Because we are very blessed in the city of Austin to have many great partnerships, and the family liaisons and being able to coordinate that means that we don't have to do everything as a district. We can leverage the community-based services, and oftentimes those community-based services can provide a lot of supports in home as well as at school, which is an important continuum of care.
And before I get the gavel, I got to get one more question in because I know that gavel is coming my way. I feel like the gong show here. So I'm curious, Nate, if you could just talk a little bit about, or the opportunity gap, any of the folks that are here on the call right now, if you can just talk a little bit about some of the trauma that is not related to COVID, but I'm thinking specifically around some of the violence in our community, kind of what is BPS planning to do with some of those responses to the students who are experiencing trauma due to violence, due to housing instability, and a lot of the core issues that continue to plague our community? Like, what does that look like in terms of support services?
Yeah, I think we've sort of highlighted already that COVID has revealed a lot of the issues that we knew persisted before, and we need to be prepared to support going back. And I saw Brian, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, is ready to jump in on homeless support. And there's definitely others in the team, I'm sure, will want to jump in on sort of some of the violence and other issues that are better
Yeah.
on students.
I want to focus on violence. I mean, homelessness, and I know that Councilor Asabi George is the biggest champion in that space. So I'm well versed of all of the advocacy that she's done to ensure that our unhoused students are well supported. I'm very specific. I'd like to double in more on around the violence issue here in the city of Boston and what BPS is doing to support our students.
Happy to jump in, Counselor. We have a district-wide crisis team that works very closely with partners from internally with several of our central office departments, but also with our partners between Public Health Commission, JRI, the trauma team, Peace Institute, and a number of others. So we're always collaborate to deploy to respond to different incidents that happen in the city. I know there's a plan for the summer also, which really started last year as well, to make sure that we have coverage over the summer because violence obviously doesn't stop in the summer, even though our schools are not necessarily open. So, and we have a protocol to responding to large scale crises or smaller crises. And so that's something that we are constantly working on, reviewing, and we'll have to train our new social workers on actually these protocols as well. So that's, go ahead.
Yeah. And would that be the same trauma with when we're closing our schools down? Do we have support services, for those transitions? Do we spend some time helping students understand that this might be the end of their time at that school, but that it's not the end of, what can you explain to us what that looks like when, like the Jackson Man, there's been several schools. Now I heard about the Timothy and the Irving, and like every time we turn around, there's another school closure, and it's usually, I'm just curious about what your budget looks like in terms of supporting these families.
Yeah, I would just say in terms of, Councilor Braden did ask a question. We did meet with families last week around the Jackson Man. I would just note in terms of the sort of order of operations, we have family meetings later with other school communities. So I don't want to get out ahead of that, in terms of those questions. And then in fairness to Carmen and her team, there's what we are building in terms of the budget and what her staff is working on right now for FY22 is focused on sort of returning well and recovering strong from the pandemic and the core work. We also are launching community conversations around Build BPS and the sort of implications of any announcements that may be coming, so that we can support families and hear from families about what they need. So it'd be premature at this point for us to talk about those supports, and it would seem incomplete, I think is probably the better way to put it, with any answers that the team would give.
Thank you, Nate.
Great.
Thank you, Carmen.
Thanks so much, Councilor Mejia. I think Councilor Braden and Councilor Edwards are both with their questions with me, so I'll just I'll go back to my second round, and then we will be wrapping this up. So I just wanted to say I do have one person, Sharon Hinton. If you're still looking to testify, now would be the time to get on the Zoom, and you could email ccc.wm@boston.gov if you don't know how to do that. Yeah, I'm going to set a timer on myself this time. I guess just would love to hear, we do have quite a collection of BPS talent on the call. And so, I imagine that these departments are some of the people who will also be advising BPS's committee on how to think about using the ESSER and federal funds. And so I would love to hear kind of from the different teams' perspectives, when we think about things that are, that could be like one-time supports, what comes to mind, right? Because one of our challenges with the federal money, obviously, when we talk about these family liaisons and social workers that we're adding this year, that's in response to needs of our district, but the ambition there is for it to be sort of long-term permanent personnel adjustments. When we talk about the federal money, it's sort of things that we could surge support on one time, whether it's equipment or capital stuff. But we're going to be talking about the capital plan, all that. I'm just more interested in like when your teams think about what could help our students, what are the types of kind of one-time supports that feel like they would move the needle or have a long afterlife, if anybody's got any thoughts or ideas on that front.
Hi, I can get us started. From the perspective of the academics division, certainly increasing the availability of quality materials for our students, making sure that our libraries are well equipped, that classrooms have classroom libraries, and the curriculum in general, that we are able to get up to par if there are gaps currently. So that is a priority. Also supports for students in terms of if they're tutoring, connecting our students with tutoring in the next few years. I think that is also a good short-term strategy. Are there other departments that want to chime in?
I would just add that in terms of instructional materials for physical education and health education, that's definitely a place, building off of what Sylvia said, that we could utilize some additional funding. I do agree it's difficult because that's not going to help us with the gaps in physical education or health education teachers, because that's just this is a one-time investment. So, but I do think that the equipment and the instructional materials would be really helpful.
And I'd like to also chime in terms of as the district is looking to increase access to more bilingual materials for our students in native language, especially for the languages that we are targeting, Haitian Creole, Cabo Verdean Creole. There are not a lot of materials that exist out on the market, so a lot of it has to be built in-house. So supports to be able to ensure that we're building robust literacy materials for our student population and honoring both their language and their culture is an area as well. Thank you.
Great. Anyone else? Thank you so much. Those are really helpful, thoughtful. And I think I totally agree that not just physical curriculum materials, but the idea there, Daphne, of kind of like the startup costs to developing culturally appropriate and academically high standard materials feels like something that could have that kind of long afterlife for our students. And especially when we consider the sort of, and the impacts that this has had on the ELL community, I just think that's really helpful. And then, so I understand we're going to talk more about the high schools on the 18th. I'm very antsy about them. So I guess I'll save more of my questions on that. I guess, what about on the kind of digital readiness side? When we think about, obviously we've made a bunch of one-time investments in that for the COVID year, but I know that sometimes Chromebooks are not that great and they break. So how are we thinking about how much of the infrastructure we've created for a year of remote learning is permanent infrastructure versus going away? And on that category of like one-time things that we could invest in that would persist, are there some of those in the kind of digital access space?
Yeah, there absolutely is. And thanks for that question. The Chromebooks that we purchased to go one-to-one was an opportunity for us to accelerate what the superintendent had already intended to do, which was to move to one-to-one computing district-wide. We had announced prior to the pandemic that we were going to go one-to-one in high schools and then increase devices at the early ages. So as part of our planning for next year, we do have both sort of device maintenance and replacement costs planned for. And then this is going to be part of our sort of ongoing new expectations and new way of doing business around technology. And so there will be a standard refresh schedule that goes with the Chromebooks. I would also note that, in our budget, we had identified already funding for COVID-related costs, but those were costs that we thought were now, I think I already said this about like the new normal. So we think that things like hand sanitizer is not likely to be something that we move away from having gone through this, right? So it's now part of our baseline costs and expectations. But as part of that, a lot of the online tools that students and staff have gotten used to that helped with asynchronous learning and online learning are part of our planned expenditures. And so learning from the pandemic, we want to make sure those resources are available to us going into next year. And as part of how we reimagine school. And so we've all adapted and learned from this. I've, again, not to talk about the two students I live with too much, but my son is now running Friday night Minecraft Zoom parties. And if you had asked him to do that pre-pandemic, I'm not sure he would have had the technical skills. I think the opportunities for learning in different ways is there, and we're going to continue to invest in it.
Great, thanks. And then just, is there any plan, again, this could maybe be deferred to the academic hearing, but is there a plan for a tutoring surge?
We are working on that.
Okay. Yeah, just definitely, yeah, it feels to me like obviously something we're gonna need to do, so. All right, well, I think, we could ask you all questions infinitely, but it's 5 before 1, and we're trying to stick to our robust hearing schedule. I don't see anyone here for public testimony, and I think all counselors have had an opportunity to ask their questions. So Nate, I'll just give you an opportunity if you want to say a final word, and then otherwise we'll adjourn.
No, thank you. Look forward to joining you all in a few hours for our afternoon hearing.
In an hour, yes. We will see everybody for the 2 p.m. hearing. Looking forward to it. Make sure to eat something in the meantime. With that, this hearing of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee is adjourned.
Hello? Can folks hear me?